Hello there. It's good to see you. This is the first video in a series that I'm going to do. It's kind of a project where I'm going to read a story that I wrote. It's a very long story. And it is about a woman who becomes involved with a church and some stuff happens. I don't want to give away a lot, but I did want to let you know that there are some elements of this story that some people may find maybe not offensive but disturbing. So I would say if you are devoutly religious and don't like to hear about bad things related to religion, you may not want to listen to this story. It is definitely not a story for children. There are a lot of adult themes. There is some violence. There is some profanity. There are some things in here that you would not want children to hear. My kids have never read it, and they won't for a long time. So, not a children's book. If you can watch Shawshank Redemption without just completely freaking out and throwing your TV out the window, you'll probably be okay. There is profanity, like I said, but it's not extreme profanity. When I wrote this, I had to keep in mind that my mom was going to read it, and I didn't want to put anything in there that I thought would be too much for her. So, there is some, but it's not, I don't think it's excessive. There are supernatural themes in the story. It is, for the most part, fiction. There are some things in here that did happen, and, they're not all good things. There are some inside jokes that people who were involved would get, but to anybody else, it would just be part of the story. So if I chuckle it apart and it doesn't make any sense, that's probably why. Because it might be something that I experienced and it just brings back memories. I have not actually read this story myself in a while. So if I stumble over some stuff, that may be why. The names of all the people, any real people, the names have been changed. The locations are all changed. Cities, states, everything has been changed to protect the people who need to be protected. I'm not worried about protecting some people, but I am worried about others. And there's no need to, all that's not accurate. So any city or state that you hear in here is probably not accurate. It may be, it may not be. I'm not going to clarify on that just because, like I said, I want it to be anonymous for a lot of reasons. But anyway, it took me 4.5 years to write it. I am excited but nervous at the same time to share it with you, and I can't really think of any other things I want to tell you before I start. I just wanted to let you know that if you're easily bothered by religious type stuff that's not pleasant, this is probably not something you need to listen to. And if at any time you find it to be uncomfortable, stop listening. That's all I know to say. There's no need to send me a message and tell me you find it offensive. Just don't listen anymore. So this is the cover. This is not the entire thing. This is just I picked out a first section, and it may be a little bit ambitious. I'm not really sure. I just picked out the first 86 pages, and the first 85 pages, and it seemed to stop at a decent point. I'm going to try to read all this. If not, then I will read some more later. But like I said, it's over 700 pages, so it's going to take a while. But this is the cover. And the title of the book is River Road, written by me. Okay, I'm going to start. We're going to start at the very beginning. This is part 1. The book is separated into 3 major parts. This will be part 1. And I have, at the very beginning, I have a quote here from Thomas Jefferson that I thought was especially appropriate and fitting for this story. Enlighten the people generally, and tyranny and oppressions of body and mind will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of day. Okay. And there will be times I'll probably show you stuff. Like there are visual things in here. Not a lot. There are a few things I want to show you. Okay. Chapter 1. It'll happen this time, I thought, leaning on my shopping cart and staring at the big-haired lady in line ahead of me. It definitely will. It has to. The Good Hope thrift store had a little bit of everything in some nook or cranny. They had this teaser they advertised on a poster board sign that hung above the main register. Get a red star on your receipt and get $5 off your next purchase. I got at least half a cartload of stuff every time I went. God knows who can afford to throw away stuff that nice, but I loved rummaging through it. It was more like treasure hunting than shopping. The line inched closer to a register that still seemed too far away. I stared at the cement floor, painted red once upon a time, wondering what I'd use my $5 for. I'd spent upwards of $300 in that stupid store since I started shopping there just 3 months earlier. The least they could do was give me a lousy $5 break once. It'd mean a return visit just to spend it. Another counter faced the main register, and when the line got too long, the cashier would scream over the PA system, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in English, depending on who she was looking for, to get somebody to open the other register. She had this shrill voice that scraped my spine every time I heard it. She looked like her name should be Lupe. I don't think I'm a bigot for saying that. She really did look like a Lupe to me. I never did find out what her name was because nobody in there ever wore a name tag. I saw a fresh roll of register tape on the outer edge of the counter, and at the very beginning of the roll was that damn red star. I glared at the roll of paper and thought about slipping it off the counter to snatch that bit of the tape. I probably could have done it before anybody saw me, and then I wouldn't have to wait any longer than I already had. An old woman in line behind me rammed into my heel with her cart as a suggestion to move along, and I left the register tape roll where it was. Every now and then when I was shopping, I'd get the urge to leave everything I'd picked up and just get out of the store because I felt so guilty about spending the money. I never could go in there without buying something. Whenever I felt like putting the stuff back, I'd let the dream of finally getting the elusive red star receipt push me on to find more things I couldn't do without. I finally made it to the register. Most of the folks in town were either white or Puerto Rican. I'm pretty sure the cashier was Puerto Rican. She had a shrill voice and was only friendly to Puerto Rican customers. I do know that for a fact. Usually she was the one running the register. She gave me her standard "what the hell do you want, white girl" look when I started dragging the stuff out of my cart to pile on her counter. It didn't matter. She didn't have anything to do with whether or not I got the red star, so I didn't go out of my way to be any nicer to her than she was to me. "That's not how you do good ministering," a familiar voice said to me. "You should look past what your flesh tells you and do good work for the Lord. Get out of your comfort zone, sister." Lupe mumbled the total in my general direction without looking up, and I handed her my credit card. She went off in the little back room with it. The credit card machine was back there, I suppose, though I never actually saw anything except the receipt I had to sign. I never even paid attention to how much all my stuff cost until I got back out to the car. All I wanted to know was whether or not I got the red star, so the total never mattered. Back across the counter came my credit card, duplicate credit card receipt, and for me to sign, and the cash register receipt. Picking up my 2 large bags, I leaned over the counter and got in Lupe's face to say in a firm and loud, yet still somewhat nice voice, "Thank you for your 3 months of exceptional service," and then left without waiting for a reaction or response. Out in the parking lot, the snow was coming down hard. I brushed a few flakes out of my eyelashes and away from my eyes and looked at the receipt in my hand. I turned it over to the backside and gasped in disbelief at what I saw. There was no red star. Just plain white paper with serrated edges, curled up into a grin from being at the end of the roll. It was laughing at me. If I'd gone through the line a bit later, had maybe one more person ahead of me, the cashier would have run out of receipt paper and would have had to put in a new roll, the roll on the other counter for sure. I squinted and looked back in the store through the display window at Lupe. Then I looked at the line of customers who were waiting for her to change the register tape. The old woman who'd hit me in the ankle with her cart would get the red star, and I'd been cast aside. The Good Hope thrift store had chewed me up and spit me out. I was blocking traffic in the parking lot and didn't even notice it until a blue Ford Escort's horn blared at me to get out of the way. I yelled, "Bitch!" at the store, projecting my anger onto the building for the red star the old heifer got but should have been mine. I sidestepped a pile of black slush and let the car pass before whirling around and heading for my Volkswagen bus. It had been snowing nonstop for almost 18 hours by then, and the inside of the bus's wheel wells were coated with layers of lumpy black ice. I kicked the front driver's side tire and watched a big hunk of the stuff fall onto the pavement. Hell had officially frozen over. I held both of my large bags in one hand and fished for the keys in my pocket with the other. Of course, they were in the pocket opposite of my free hand, so I had to shuffle the bags around to reach them. I looked up at the traffic speeding by on the 4-lane road in front of the store. Out of nowhere, a black limousine pulled up behind the bus and stopped. Just seeing it out of the corner of my eye made my heart leap up into my throat. A window in the back glided down smoothly. "Sister Lydia," I heard a voice say, "come here a minute, please. Can I put my bags up first? I'll have the driver park around the side of the building. Meet us over there." "Yes, sir." My mind was reeling with possibilities, but there was no way I'd let it show. I truly hated that man, and I feared him. I didn't know what he'd do to me. I opened the driver's side door of my bus and threw the bags in the passenger seat, staring through the back window at the limousine creeping around the left side of the building. "Bitch!" I yelled again from inside the bus, this time at the limo and a little bit louder than the first time. I figured he couldn't hear me, but part of me hoped he did. I locked the bus back up and walked in the tire tracks the limo had made in the snow. Nobody ever parked on that side of the store, so we were alone out there. The windows were tinted so black you couldn't see into the passenger section at all. It made me think of drug dealers because of that. His window glided down halfway. "Get in." All I could do was nod and obey. I was on the verge of panic. No witnesses, I thought. No one to help me. This was unprecedented, and I wondered what Drew would think. The door opened. "We were just on our way out of town," Carl said. "Join us." An outstretched hand awaited mine, and I took it and stepped inside. The door closed behind me. Chapter 2. Richard read over his leaflet about the conference after Sunday morning service and smiled. He couldn't believe they were actually coming this year. Brother Brian Beauchamp could see Richard's gleeful expression from the other side of the fellowship hall, and he left a group of the brothers to see what it was about. "Who said you could be happy?" "My sister and grandparents are coming to the conference," Richard said, grinning even more. "I've invited them the last 4 years in a row, and they always turn me down for one reason or another. I guess I finally got to them because Grandma left me a message in the front office that they're making plans to come, and they're going to stay for the whole week." "Hey, that's great," Brian said. "I can't get my parents to come, and they live right here in the same state. How pitiful is that?" The last weekend before the conference was a hectic one of last-minute planning for thousands of families, including Richard's. "Look at it this way," Sylvia said to her husband Warren as she washed the breakfast dishes. "We can see what Richard's been so excited about these past 5 years, and we'll get to spend some time with him. With Lydia coming, we'll have the whole family together again. That's worth the price of our plane tickets right there." "It's the only way we'll ever see him, I guess," Warren said, and he laughed bitterly. "Seems like the planes and buses don't run from there to here. I honestly don't know how I feel about a church that doesn't have a denomination." He thought about the silky pamphlets and church bulletins they started getting every month after Richard put them on the OACC mailing list. "I don't care how nice it looks." "I'm not worried about what it looks like. At least he's going to somebody's church. That's better than nothing in my opinion. I really want to meet his pastor." "Pastor C.T. Faust," Warren said, remembering the picture that appeared on the back of every Open Arms bulletin. "Richard said he's from North Carolina originally. His family's up in the mountains somewhere. I believe Lydia said his first church was somewhere up near Appalachian State. That'd be over a 2-hour drive from here. Well, I didn't say I was going there." Sylvia stopped rinsing the plates long enough to look out the kitchen window. "The grass will need mowing by the time we get back," she mumbled. "It could use it now. Dean said he'd come feed the dogs, but I don't know what we're going to do about the yard. I'm not asking him to do it. He's got his hands full with Verna as it is." "It'll be all right." Warren went back to his newspaper. 60 miles away, Lydia Roberts was hanging out her laundry in the backyard clothesline, listening to music streaming out her open back door. And then there's the song "Beast of Burden," and I have some of the lyrics. "Yeah, all your sickness, I can suck it up. Throw it all at me, I can shrug it off. There's one thing, baby, I don't understand. You keep on telling me I ain't your kind of man." She savored her weekends now that she was out of college and working a 5-day week like regular people. No more nights or weekends except for the occasional on-call holiday or her 2 weeks a year to carry the pager. She'd worked in retail to put herself through college and hadn't known the pleasure of a weekend off in over 6 years. This would be the first time she didn't have to work on Christmas Day since 1991. With a mouthful of clothespins, she danced from one side of the clothesline to the other, carrying a double armload of wet jeans and T-shirts, slinging them over the line and clipping them wherever the clothespin landed. I don't need no beast of burden. I need no fussing. I need no nursing. Never, 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 never be. Lines of the song. Her next door neighbor, Frank, shirtless and hungover, walked out on his back porch and stretched, squinting in the mid-morning sun. He would have benefited from a bath and a shave. You still going to Illinois next week? As far as I know, Lydia said, dumping the leftover clothespins back in the canvas bag hanging on the left side of the clothesline. My brother's out there. Then she realized what Frank had said and added, It's Indiana, not Illinois. Oh, I knew it was one of those I states. When are you leaving? Tuesday afternoon. I should be back Wednesday night. I'm going with my grandparents to see my brother and go to his church's conference. Cool. Lydia went inside and came back out a moment later with a lawn chair, a glass of iced tea, and a pack of cigarettes. I swear I love my weekends, she said as she lay herself down on the chair. It's so nice not to have to sacrifice my weekends for the almighty dollar anymore. You need a light? She nodded, and Frank tossed his lighter down to her. A long time passed without either of them saying anything. Frank wandered back inside, and Lydia lit her cigarette. She held it down by her right thigh and stared at the clothesline. It ought to be rip-roaring fun, she mumbled, thinking about putting on dresses and spending an entire week in church just to see Richard. A gust of wind disturbed a nearby magnolia tree and sent a loose leaf fluttering down into her lap. She picked it up and stared at it, turning it over to steady the back. She stroked the waxy surface, then touched the edge of it with the lit end of her cigarette. The leaf smoldered in that spot. My brother. What a strange character he turned out to be. Frank shut his back door. Who lets their whole life revolve around a church? Chapter 3. Lydia and her grandparents were a bit surprised to be met at the Indianapolis airport by two complete strangers. The brothers were nice enough. They carried all their luggage from the baggage claim to the car and chatted sprightly the whole way, but Richard was nowhere to be seen. We apologize for this, one of the brothers said as he got in the front passenger seat of the car, but Brother Rich got hung up at the church and couldn't make it out here. That's all right, Sylvia lied. Warren and Liddy sat on either side of her, choosing to stare out the window and only speak if spoken to. So you guys flew all the way here from North Carolina, the other brother, who was driving, said. I hear it's beautiful down there. It is, Sylvia nodded. You ought to come out and see it for yourself sometime. The brother nodded. Lydia watched the traffic and the billboards on the side of the road whiz by as they sped down the interstate heading south to Dalton Fisher. The men had introduced themselves at the gate, and she and her grandparents got off the plane, and now, less than 30 minutes later, she couldn't remember anything anybody said. Everything after Brother Rich couldn't make it had been erased from her present memory. Brother Rich, she thought. I don't think I can get used to calling Richard that. Then the names Bert and Reggie came to mind. Was that right? The names sounded familiar, but which was which? Trying to be discreet, she leaned up enough to look at the one in the passenger seat. Short red hair, mustache, wide face, glasses, short bulbous nose. He looked like a Reggie. In fact, she thought he looked a bit like the Reggie, the one in the old comic books her grandmother kept in the attic in taped up cardboard boxes. Then she looked in the driver's side mirror at the other one. Light blonde hair, heavy jowls, no glasses, mustache, acne scars. As different as their faces were, aside from the mustaches, one thing haunted Liddy. They seemed to be exactly the same. She looked at them closer, this time catching the eye of the driver in the mirror. No, she decided physical appearance had nothing to do with it. Suddenly, the man in the passenger seat turned around. He looked at Lydia as if he knew what she'd been thinking about his friend and him. She forced a smile. You guys are in for a real treat, the passenger said. I understood you've never been to one of our international conferences. Is that right? That's right, Sylvia said. Oh, Lordy, the driver piped up, glancing at them through the rearview mirror. Brother Bert knows what I'm talking about, the one Lydia assumed was Reggie said. This'll be our biggest one yet. Brother Rich wanted to make sure you guys would be comfortable, so he made arrangements for you to stay with one of the families in our congregation here. God always provides for us, Bert said. He helps his followers who choose to glorify him. Instead of going to the church as they had expected, they pulled into the driveway of a 3-story brick house just south of Fisher. A man and woman met them in front of the garage as the car rolled to a stop. This is the Spellman's house, Bert said as he opened the back driver's side door to let Lydia and Sylvia out. And here come Barbara and Dr. Charles Spellman. You'll be staying with them for the next week. My goodness, Sylvia whispered to Liddy. A doctor! She did a good job at hiding her surprise at the couple that now approached her. Charles was black, Barbara was white. Barbara moved around Bert and practically tackled poor Liddy, giving her a mauling bear hug and sweeping her right up off the concrete. Just as soon as she had the girl airborne, she dropped her and went after Sylvia. After the round of introductions, Bert and Reggie took everybody's bags inside, welcomed them to the conference once again, and returned to the church. Dang, Grandma, Liddy whispered to Sylvia, do you believe this place? The Lord truly has blessed us, Dr. Spellman said. Let me take your bags upstairs. I'll show you to the guest rooms. They talked for over an hour in the living room after getting their things settled into their rooms and going on Barbara's tour of the house, pool, and tennis courts, never once hearing any mention of going to the church to see Richard. Then dinner was prepared and eaten, and all the Spellmans had to say about Richard was that he was a credit to the Single Brothers Ministry. Everyone went to bed after discussing the agenda for the following day. There were still no plans for seeing Richard, and Liddy was getting angry. She pulled the covers up to her ears and curled up into a ball on the queen-size bed Barbara had designated as hers for the week. Somewhere nearby was her brother. Neither she nor her grandparents had seen him in over 5 years, and now no one seemed to care that they flew all that way and didn't even get to visit with him. Not that evening, anyway. It was so far we had to come. When they talked about it earlier, she mumbled into the edge of the bedspread. Not far enough to matter, apparently. Sylvia and Warren lay side by side, each feeling their disappointment and venting their frustration silently in their thoughts. Chapter 4. Aidan Gervais went for a walk around the grounds of the church early the following morning to check on everyone's progress. Most of the men were moving to their positions to direct traffic at the main gates and in the scattered parking lots, or they were in the activity center making final adjustments to the rows of seats and decorations if they weren't in the fellowship hall. The catering crew was set up in the fellowship hall, and Ken diligently monitored their work. Aidan watched from one of the sound booths as Ken moved from one serving table to another, testing the breakfast foods and chatting with the wait staff. How old is he now? Aidan wondered. He did the math from 1970 and realized Ken was 60 years old. My, he thought. Time passes so quickly here. He didn't look 60. Not a day over 50, actually. Aidan smiled at his energy and his desire to make sure everything was perfect. The home cook and catering company had done a splendid job, and Ken admired them as Pastor Faust's choice. Aidan, I need to talk to you. Aidan whirled around. Oh, Archie, he said. I didn't know you were back there behind me. Where can we go talk? Can it wait? It's urgent, Archie said, looking around. I'm expecting Pastor Faust any minute, but you said... Pastor Faust rounded the corner and strolled through the double doors of the fellowship hall, taking in the sight of all the glistening chrome and the smell of that wonderful food. My glorious heaven, he cried out loud to no one. Aidan and Archie heard his voice and looked down. Go to the gazebo, Aidan said. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. Archie went downstairs to greet Pastor Faust and then darted out the door. Aidan followed closely behind and entered the fellowship hall. Pastor Faust approached Aidan and shook his hand. It's finally here, he said. The place looks great. Ken's over there waiting for you to come say hello, and there's been a bit of a dispute with the men attending the west parking lot. It seems, what's your newest eunuch's name? Bert? He says he wants to work inside, either in the activity or here, because being outdoors will cause his allergies to act up. It's not good for morale to have him out there grousing around. Somebody needs to set him straight. Pastor Faust sighed. I guess we've had worse problems than that on our first day. I've handled quite a few disputes this morning already. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go put out another fire at one of the brothers' houses. But there shouldn't be anybody out there this time of... Are you going to be here a while? Yeah, the guests will come here first for the fellowship breakfast, and I'll stand at the door to greet them. Me and Ken will do that. Where's your wife? Aidan asked. Ruby? Pastor Faust scratched his head. You know what? I have no idea. I haven't seen her today. She may still be at the house for all I know. It'd look better if you greeted people at the door with her, Aidan began to say, and then stopped. We've been busy these past 2... Shh, Aidan said. Let me listen. Richard Roberts' family is here. Ken finally caught Pastor Faust's eye and waved eagerly from the other side of the room. Pastor Faust waved back. That's fine, he said to Aidan, giving Ken the thumbs-up sign. I'll be here to greet him then. Aidan walked over to the window and peered out into the rising sun. No, he said, I don't think you should. Something's not right. What? I'll divert them. You just stay here. Pastor Faust looked out the window for himself but didn't see anyone. I'll just hang around in here with Ken and the catering folks until people start coming in. Aiden ran out the front door of the church and then came to an abrupt halt about 100 yards from the Spellman's Suburban. There's someone in that car that... The young lady. Lydia and Sylvia were climbing out of the car when a small boy approached. "Good morning," he said. Warren came around the other side of the car and waved at the little boy. "Oh, look, honey," Barbara said to her husband. "What a cute little gentleman we have here to greet us." She bent down and shook his tiny hand. "And what is your name, young man?" "God bless you," the boy said. "Just look at that beautiful head of hair," Sylvia said, walking over to him. "Your hair is so light it looks nearly platinum." "Good morning, ma'am," the boy said, shaking her hand. "God bless you." "Well, God bless you, too. Where are your parents, dear?" The boy pointed to the activity center. "They're inside," he said. "They wanted me to let you know that it's still too early to go into the fellowship hall. They're still setting up. You can go in the activity center if you like." He felt Liddy staring at him. Dr. Spellman glanced at his watch. "I guess it is a bit early. So, little boy, who are your parents?" "I'm a member of the church," he said. Barbara grimaced. "I don't believe I've ever seen you before," she said. "What's your name?" "My name is Aiden, ma'am." "Aiden? What's your last name?" "Gervais, ma'am." He buttoned his tweed coat and adjusted a cuff link. "Gervais," Barbara said, thinking. "Does your family... Why don't we go on into the activity center and find your mommy and daddy? What do you say?" Aiden nodded and said that would be fine. "May I shake her hand, too, before we go?" He was pointing at Liddy. Barbara laughed. "I don't see why not." Liddy approached and Aiden took her hand. He held it for several seconds, even after Liddy's first delicate attempt to let go. "My goodness," Liddy said, trying to ignore the quivering electric impulses traveling from Aiden's palm to her own. "What a nice firm grip you've got." Aiden suddenly released her hand, looked into her eyes, and frowned. What is it about her, he wondered. "Okay, then." Barbara took Aiden by the hand and led the parade of people down the stone pathway to the center. Upon entering the building, Barbara spied Phil and called out to him. "Brother Phil," she shouted. "Brother Phil, could you come here for a second?" Phil approached slowly. "Well, hello, sister," he said, glancing down at the child. "What can I do for you on this glorious morning? I see you brought a few visitors with you." "I need to find this young man's parents," Barbara replied, and she stooped down. "What did you say your name was? Adrian?" "My name is Aiden, ma'am." Phil seemed surprised. "Aiden? Is that your first name?" "That is my first name, sir. My full name is Aiden Gervais." Phil's eyes bulged out and he stood up straight. "Oh, my! Well then, Mr. Gervais, let me see if I can locate your parents for you." Standing on tiptoe, he pretended to look around the room. "Do you know them?" Dr. Spellman asked. "Are they visitors?" "They must be. I'd surely remember seeing this fine little gentleman in children's church if they were in our congregation." He gave Aiden a friendly pat on the head, which Phil found amusing, and he let out a shrill, giddy laugh. Lydia was growing weary of the whole thing. "Where the hell is Richard?" she whispered into her grandmother's ear. "I'm sick of this waiting around shit." Sylvia pinched her arm hard enough to leave a mark. "Why don't you all go down front?" Phil said. "It'll be a little bit before breakfast is served, but we've got a monitor set up in front showing some of Pastor Faust's videotaped sermons if you're interested." He watched the adults' reactions anxiously, not daring to look down at Aiden. Everyone nodded, and Phil breathed a sigh of relief. "I'll make sure and find Aiden's parents," he said, as he watched the group walk down the velvet-carpeted aisle. After they were comfortably seated and out of earshot, Phil let go of Aiden's hand and stood back away from him, staring at his little body in disbelief. "What in the world are you doing looking like a kid?" he asked as discreetly as he could. "I've got to get out of here," Aiden said. "I need you to go find Jake. There's a dispute in the parking lot I want him to handle, and there's someplace else I have to be." Phil glanced around him at the growing crowd of visitors and congregation members. Then he bent down and whispered to Aiden, "I really want to thank you, for helping me with my faith and everything." "We help each other here," Aiden said. "Maybe one day you'll get a chance to do something for me." "I'll be right there ready to do it. I mean that, Aiden. I know you do." Phil and Aiden parted ways. Aiden moved on toward the gazebo, unseen by the oncoming traffic in the parking lots or the flood of people heading for the fellowship hall. He was back to his usual appearance by the time he arrived and spotted Archie sitting inside the gazebo alone, his head in his hands. "Archie," Aiden said, stepping inside and sitting down. "I'm here now. It's okay." Archie looked up. His face was twisted and anxious. Aiden moved closer and put his arm around Archie's shoulder. It's all right, brother. I know what you're going through, and I can feel how tough it is. It's a nightmare not knowing who to believe, isn't it? It's especially hard when it comes to something as important as the destination of your soul. Archie jumped. How did you know that was my problem? You were up all night last night thinking about the things we discussed, Aiden said. I offered to take care of your struggle with faith and trust. But you have this hesitation, and that hesitation comes from thinking that what I've offered you is too good to be true. You think there has to be something wrong with me just wanting to help you. I want to believe there's a chance. There was a time a few years back when your parents became involved with the group known as the Cult Awareness Network, and they had you kidnapped, Aiden said quickly. If I recall, you were the first one from your house to have that dreadful thing happen to you. Is that right? That's right. How traumatic that must have been. Oh my. Just about the worst night of my life. But we got you back here, didn't we? Pastor Faust got me back, Archie said. Nobody else even knows the details of what happened. But wait. You were held captive in a motel room in Iowa for about 3 days. I do know that, Aiden said. And they tried to deprogram you, tried to break you down your defenses and make you believe what you thought was your calling was really just a trick of a deceptive, evil organization. They made you repeat the phrase, my church, the Open Arms, is a cult, over and over again for 12 hours. We love you, they said, and you just cried and cried. Archie winced at the memory. They deprived you of sleep so you couldn't think. They yelled at you. They got in your face and screamed all those awful lies. Your parents were there on the second day and tried to convince you not to come back here, but they failed. They certainly did. They failed because you had someone watching over you. You knew that even before Pastor Faust showed up at their doorstep and forced his way in there to carry you out of there himself. Yes, Archie said. It was a miracle that Pastor Faust knew exactly where to go to find you, wasn't it? There's no other explanation, Archie said. I know you help him out and all, but... He looked out in the forest with contentment. I'm glad he's the one responsible for my soul. Amen to that, Aiden said. How blessed you and the others are who made the choice to follow him. A pause followed, and Archie felt Aiden staring at him. He blushed and his heart began to race. What? He asked. There's not a man, woman, or child in this whole ministry that I can't see inside and out. Pastor Faust and I have to work together to use that information. Use the tools of strength, experience, talent, and passion in every person who calls the Open Arms their ministry to do what we came here to do. But why is it that you haven't revealed yourself before now? Why all the secrecy? I think you'd want everybody to know about you. We have a lot of critics out there that say all sorts of bad things about Pastor Faust. But if they found out about you, it'd make a big difference if they knew who you were, Aiden. It's more complicated than it appears, Aiden said. You don't just come out and tell everybody, hey, there's an angel down here. We've got an angel here on earth, and he's helping some pastor in Indiana. No, see, the problem with that is, if everybody knew, they'd expect to be able to come to me for help. Even the Open Arms parishioners wouldn't want to go to Pastor Faust anymore because he, as wonderful and devoted as a man as he is, he's still just a man. Why look to a mortal human being for direction when you've got a supernatural entity right here? He pointed at himself. Archie stared off into the woods again and said nothing. Do you think I'm evil? Aiden asked. Archie lost his breath. I don't. If you can read my thoughts, you know I don't know. Okay, that's fair. I wouldn't expect you to believe something based solely on my word. You have to get confirmation from Pastor Faust on this one, Archie. Go to Pastor Faust. See what he has to say about me. I'd already planned to do that. And when Pastor Faust tells you that we're on the same side, what will you believe? That would decide it. If Pastor Faust says you're an angel, it must be true. Aiden smiled. Amen. Let's get back to the church. Chapter 5. Richard had been working in the church basement along with 4 other brothers the evening that his family arrived for the conference. A catastrophe had occurred. Pastor Faust had ordered OACC International Conference commemorative erasers 6 months beforehand, along with the rest of the meet-greet packet materials, but someone overlooked them when the assembly lines were set up. Pastor Faust entered the downstairs conference room where the crew of men handpicked to manage the task of putting erasers in each of the 25,000 bags piled in the storage room was already assembled. Clayton came along closely behind him. I didn't mean for y'all to end up stuck with this, Pastor Faust said. Here's the problem. He kicked a large cardboard box sitting by the door. I have about 10 boxes just like this in the very back of the upstairs utility closet for about 2 months, and they were somehow forgotten until just this morning. So it looks like we're in for a long night, Pastor Faust said, clearing his throat. I've asked to have some coffee brewed up for y'all and brought down here. Dinner's in about half an hour, so if y'all wouldn't mind just running up to the fellowship hall and bringing your food down here to eat when it's time. I don't usually allow that. I don't usually allow people to have food down here because it draws bugs, but this time I'll make an exception. One of the newly baptized brothers brought in the other boxes of erasers on a flatbed cart, nodded to Pastor Faust, and left the room. Pastor Faust motioned to Ken to come take over and then disappeared back upstairs with Clayton. Richard worked in silence. He gave no thought to the fact that for the last month he'd looked forward to the chance to go to Indianapolis to pick up his family at the airport. He also chose to neglect the thought that he couldn't take the time to go call them and let them know that he wouldn't be there. Pastor Faust had personally selected him to be a part of this special team. The erasers had to be put into the bags that night or they would be wasted. OACC 25th anniversary items were only useful once and only in the meet-greet packets. Pastor Faust said so. Bert and Reggie could handle the transportation of his family. Brian sat at the table to Richard's left, and he watched Richard as he frequently went back and forth from the mountain of erasers to his work table, to the stack of meet-greet packets in the corner of the room. I remember having these pink erasers in school, he offered. Richard just looked over and smiled. I'd draw stuff all over them. By the time I actually needed to use it, it'd be all nasty and coated with ink, so it made more of a mess than it cleaned up. My mom would get mad because she kept having to buy more. Stop making so many mistakes, she'd say. You're running me out of house and home. Richard didn't look up. He just kept stuffing erasers into little plastic bags. So will your family get here in time for the fellowship breakfast tomorrow morning? Yep. That's cool. I bet you're excited. Uh-huh. It just blesses me to know you've reached out to your family and got them to come all the way here from North Carolina. It's better than I could do with my family, and they live right here in Indiana. Yeah. Richard rose from his seat to get more supplies. Brian watched him move slowly, methodically across the room with a double handful of OACC erasers. He took his seat and pushed the bags he'd already finished further down the table for more workroom. Brian moved over to his table and sat down close to him. Is there something wrong? He asked. No, Richard said, still not looking up. We just have to get these done by morning, and I want to be able to do it as fast as I can. I can't work if I keep stopping to talk. But you could quit for just a second, Brian said. Richard stopped working long enough to give him an angry look. Please, I want to get this done. Pastor Faust said we have to have them ready by morning, and at this rate we're going to be here till dawn. All right, Brian said. Sorry I bothered you. He walked back to his seat and sat down, depressed and slightly embarrassed, still feeling spiteful eyes staring at the back of his head. Lydia was frustrated almost to the point of bursting by the time she and the others took the walk from the activity center over to the fellowship hall. All these people, and Richard's nowhere in sight, she whispered to her grandfather. Have they got him locked up in a dungeon somewhere? We should be able to get a really good table this early in the morning, Dr. Spellman said, heading up the group. A lot of people are still on their way in. They were greeted by Ruby and Ken at the main entrance of the church. Sister Faust, Brother Ken, Dr. Spellman said as he shook their hands vigorously. Beautiful day in the Lord, amen? Oh, yes, Ken said. What a glorious day. I love the first day of conference. Always someone new to meet around every corner. I'd like to meet my brother, Lydia murmured, scowling. Damn boy's about as much of a stranger to me as this old guy. And who are these good folks you have with you? Ruby asked. She extended her hand to Sylvia, who was closest to her. This is the family of Brother Rich Roberts, Barbara told her. This is Sylvia Roberts and her husband Warren. And this charming young lady is Lydia, Brother Rich's younger sister. They've come all the way from North Carolina to be with us at the conference. Everyone shook hands and smiled warmly. A line of people was building up behind them, so they moved on into the fellowship hall to find a seat. Doesn't everything look terrific? Barbara asked her husband, who looked around the expansive room in awe. The decorations committee went all out this year. It really was impressive. The ladies chosen by Pastor Faust's daughter, Hannah, to coordinate the decorating efforts had chosen blue and silver as their main color theme, and the room was tastefully adorned with blue and silver streamers, tulle, balloons, and glitter. Even the linen napkins placed on every table had the designated colors. Just look at it all, Sylvia said. It's so enchanting. Liddy mirrored the smile she saw on everybody else's face, though she didn't share their enthusiasm. She thought and wanted to say out loud so bad, "It's a church, Grandma, not Prince Charming's castle." Sylvia looked over at her and winked. "I knew you'd love it," she whispered. Liddy nodded and continued smiling. They were just about to get up and go mingle with the other breakfast guests when Liddy let out a shriek. She'd spotted her brother standing behind Dr. Spellman. "Richard," she called out. "Hey, over here!" Richard turned and watched his sister waving at him from just 20 feet away. He smiled and waved back. "Well, don't just stand there like a robot," Liddy stood up and yelled. "Get your chunky butt over here." The Spellmans, who had turned around in their seats to see Richard, turned back to cast a surprised glance at this wild person at their table. What would Pastor Faust think of that? Barbara wondered, yelling across the room like some maniac. I can't imagine. Richard left the group of people he'd stopped to talk to and walked over. "I was just coming to see you guys," he said, and he shook Dr. Spellman's hand. "God bless you, brother." Lydia didn't wait for him to make it around to her side of the table. She ran around the chairs and the hanging crepe paper and grabbed up her brother in a bear hug. Then she looked up at him, showing her first real smile since she left North Carolina. "Where have you been?" Richard moved out of her embrace and straightened his jacket. He noticed the meet-greet packets on their table. I've been... How was your flight?" He bent down and gave his grandmother a tentative hug. "It was pretty good," Warren said, and he reached out and shook Richard's hand. "Good to see you, Richard." "You too." "So," Liddy said, her foot tapping lightly on the marble floor, "what's the deal? We've been here since last night, like 12 hours now, and you've just been too busy to call us or come see us? And you couldn't come to the airport either? That just sucks, Richard." Richard quickly glanced down at the Spellmans, embarrassed by Liddy's choice of words. It's been a busy week for us here," he said. "Oh, I'm sure it has been," Sylvia cooed, giving his arm a pat. "And we're not upset or anything." She glared at Liddy. "It's just that certain members of this family have a little trouble with patience. We have the next 7 days to spend together, so don't worry about it." Liddy was staring at Richard's head. "What happened to you? You got gray hair now." "Good grief, Richard, and a mustache? What the hell?" "So, Richard," Barbara said quickly, "what's on the menu for breakfast this morning?" "We've got some of everything," he said, looking back at the buffet the caterers had set up. "All sorts of stuff. Anything you want, they've got." No one thought to offer Richard a seat to rest his overtired body. Dr. Spellman adjusted his glasses and turned to face Sylvia and Warren, who were sitting down. "You see," he said, "this is the first year we've catered the event. Usually the single brothers handle all the cooking. Isn't that right, Brother Rich?" "It's going to be great," Richard said. "Pastor Faust chose this catering company personally." He bent down closer to the table. "But if it's better than what we used to cook," he said in a low tone, "please don't tell us. It hurt our feelings." He forced a laugh. Warren looked around. "I'm looking forward to meeting your pastor," he said. "Is he here yet?" "He had to go up to his office for some last-minute emergency," Richard said. "I don't know what it is, but it must be awfully important for him to miss the chance to greet people coming in. He always looks forward to that." Some of the single brothers had been sent to the fellowship hall to mingle and talk with the visitors before breakfast, and several of them had eyed the lady Richard seemed to know fairly well. Brian in particular had noticed her. He saw her practically tackle Richard when he went over to the table. That can't be his sister, he thought as he spoke with Phil's mother, who had suffered a bus ride all the way from Tucson to be there, and watched the young lady over her shoulder. "Excuse me?" Phil's mother said, noticing Brian's attention had wandered away to something more interesting on the other side of the room. She noticed the commotion brewing behind Brian's back as well. "Son, there's a man on that platform behind you. He looks like he's getting ready to say something." Brian apologized for his rudeness and seated her. He walked to the back of the room and stood by the door with several of the other brothers. Only 8 cups of Ken's special brew of coffee kept him from collapsing right where he stood from fatigue. "Look at this beautiful bunch of people," Ken said to Hannah, who was standing just behind him on the little white platform. The microphone picked up his comment and got everyone's attention. Sylvia nudged Warren. "Look, there's Pastor Faust." "Oh, no," Dr. Spellman said. "That's Brother Ken Thomas." "I want to thank you all for coming," Ken said, and he grinned at the expansive crowd. "It's a glorious day here at the Open Arms. I'm sorry Pastor Faust wasn't able to stand at the door with Sister Faust to greet you as you came in. You probably wondered why you had to shake my big old mitt instead of his. Well, he's got a problem upstairs in his office, and he had to go deal with it. Now, don't worry. He's just making some phone calls, and has already given me his word that he'll be back down here before breakfast is over. And I think we can certainly hold him to that. I hope it's nothing serious, Sylvia whispered to Barbara, who looked a little uneasy at the news. Ken continued, "Let's all bow our heads, shall we?" His prayer began as a word of thanks to the Lord for allowing those who were already in town for the conference to arrive safely, and then request that the others who would be coming over the next few days would also be protected from harm. The prayer then moved to ask for help for Pastor Faust to minister and overcome the sensitive situation in which he suddenly found himself. Aidan stood outside the closed door of Pastor Faust's office, listening to the conversation. He had to be ready to help Pastor Faust if he needed it. There had only been a few minutes in which Aidan could tell Pastor Faust that Archie was coming before he actually showed up at Pastor Faust's door. Now Aidan was on the other side of that door, wondering what Pastor Faust's reaction to Archie's enlightenment to the facts was going to be. Pastor Faust sat on the edge of his desk and leaned down to Archie. "So what can I do for you?" "I've got something to tell you, Pastor, but I don't know what your reaction's going to be." "I'm sure we can work through it, whatever it is." "I know Aidan Gervais." Pastor Faust had to steady himself. "Come again?" "I know Aidan Gervais," Archie repeated. "He said I should come talk to you to get confirmation that he is who he says he is." "Well, who did he say he was?" "No offense, but I need to hear you say who he is, Pastor." Pastor Faust sighed. "All right. Aidan's an angel sent here by God to help me." "Aidan Gervais is an angel?" "He's been helping me in my ministry since I was 19 years old," he hurriedly added before Archie could reply. "I'm sure you recall hearing about the vision. The one you had on that dirt road back in North Carolina?" "That's the one," Pastor Faust said. "Oh, yes, sir. We have a whole Bible study on that. I love that story. You were confronted on that lonely dirt road out there all by yourself in the... I was coming back from preaching on a Wednesday night service and found myself in the midst of glory, yes," Pastor Faust said. "There's something about that night that I was sworn to keep secret, something that was to remain locked up tight until the right time, and that time has finally come." Archie couldn't speak. "Your arrival here with the news that you've been made aware of Aidan's existence indicates to me that the time has come to reveal a secret I've been forced to keep since that hot summer night in 1956. I was given a real guardian angel that night, Archie. I can assure you the angels are real, and they're sent down here on earth to help men like me. His name to us on earth is Aidan Gervais." "Oh, my. Does what I've told you just now confirm what he said?" Pastor Faust asked. "He did say he was here to help you do what you were called to do." He nodded. Archie nodded, let out a smile, and sighed. "I think you just gave me the confirmation I was looking for on that." "I can't believe it," Pastor Faust said, looking off into space. "I never thought the time would come when Aidan could start reaching out to my brothers to minister to them like this. This is a momentous occasion in our ministry, and you play a significant part in it. You know that, don't you?" Archie smiled. "I'm very proud to be one of the ones specially chosen," he said. So am I. I'm glad for you and me both. Glad we're part of this wonderful calling of the Lord. You know what Aidan told me? He said that there have been a lot of men like me that he's personally been sent to proposition for the calling, and they turned him down. Hundreds of men. Can you imagine being presented with an opportunity like that and just walking away from it? "No, sir, but I tell you, meeting Aidan has restored a faith I'm not ashamed to admit I'd almost lost in the ministry," Archie said. "It feels so good to be freed of that burden." "I'm sure it does." Pastor Faust glanced at his watch. "Is that all you needed to speak to me about then?" "Yes, sir, that was pretty much it. I just didn't want to get mixed up with the wrong side, if you know what I mean." Pastor Faust gave Archie a good-natured slap on the shoulder. "I think we ought to get on downstairs, don't you? I've got Eduardo in a room down the hall watching TV. Just had a couple brothers pick him up from the airport." "That's wonderful, sir. It's going to be an awesome conference. I just know it." "Well, let's get on down there." Richard had quietly moved to the back of the room to stand with Brian and the others during the opening prayer. "I forgot my spontaneous testimony notes," he whispered to Brian. "I know we weren't supposed to just read off what we wrote, but I'm so tired I can't remember anything I wanted to say. I'm dead without those notes." "Just make it up," Brian whispered back. "That's all I was going to do. Think of something positive and throw in a few God just blessed me phrases there, and nobody'll know the difference." The brother to Brian's left jabbed him in the side with the elbow as a cue to be silent. The brothers had to wait and go through one of the 4 monstrous buffet lines after all the guests had had their turn. It was a time the brothers were supposed to be mingling about, but Brian used it to corner Richard about the mysterious young woman. "I saw you talking with some people earlier," he said. "You were over near the platform where Brother Ken was. Do you know who I'm talking about?" "That's my family," Richard said. "I'd introduce you, but we're supposed to be sharing with people right now." All the other brothers had split off and melted into the crowds of people either going to or coming from the buffet lines. "Get some sausage or bacon or something," Sylvia said. "You'll be hungry again in an hour if all you eat is fruit." "What about some scrambled eggs?" "Hang on," Liddy said, irritated. She looked at what lay ahead of her on the table. "I'd really like to have a bagel. Those biscuits look so greasy, I'll be puking the rest of the day if I ate one." The server on the other side of the table gave her a tense smile when she looked up. Suddenly aware that her comments had been heard, she escaped by turning back to Sylvia. "Where'd Richard go?" "He had things to do," Sylvia answered, remembering the mumbled comment Richard made before the prayer, something about ministering to people. He had vanished before the prayer was over. She was glad he didn't end up spending his life around a bunch of drug addicts or boozers. Thank God he found such comfort and safety in the church. "Well, he'll be sitting with us, though, right?" "I don't think so," Sylvia said. Lydia looked out at the crowd. She'd lost sight of their table. "Well, where's he going to sit then?" "I don't think he'll be eating the same time we do. Maybe he's already eaten. I don't know. Either way, he won't be with us." "Well, that's retarded," Lydia said. "We've come all this way and don't even get to eat breakfast with him." "It'll be better after everything gets going," Sylvia said. "Other people have family from out of town, and they're bound to get to have some time to visit with them some." Lydia and Sylvia headed back to their table, resigned to eating their breakfast and chatting with the Spellmans and all the people who happened to drop by. Warren had disappeared after excusing himself to go refill his coffee, and Sylvia was just getting up to go search for him when Barbara grabbed her arm. Her eyes were wide as she stood up and said, "Wait, sister, Pastor Faust is about to make his entrance." Ken had returned to the platform. "Will everyone please rise," he spoke into his microphone, "and welcome our bishop and founding pastor, Pastor C.T. Faust." Lydia and Sylvia quickly stood up along with the rest of the crowd, craning their necks to try to catch a glimpse of him. A hush fell over the crowd. People in the back of the great room could see the main entrance from monitors mounted on posts suspended from the ceiling, and when they finally caught a glimpse of Pastor Faust, they gasped in one collective breath. "There he is! He's finally here!" Pastor Faust and his entourage snaked their way through the room, around tables and clusters of people, finally stopping just to the left of Ken's platform. Lydia noticed the dark young man Pastor Faust was walking with. They'd held hands and waved to the crowd all the way to the platform. I knew a seat in front of the platform would be the best," Barbara said. "This is where the action is. They're right here in front of us." Pastor Faust paused, then walked over to their table. "My goodness," he said. Barbara looked about ready to faint. Pastor Faust glanced at the other tables nearby and frowned. "You don't seem to have a candle on your table. That won't do." He snapped his fingers, and one of the servers ran over with a fresh candle. Pastor Faust lit the candle with a butane lighter provided by another server and gently placed it in the middle of the table. Then he motioned to Ken to hand over the microphone. "That's better," he spoke into the black metal mesh, and his words swept over the crowd. "I'm Pastor Charles T. Faust." He shook Sylvia's hand, and all Sylvia could do was say thank you. Then he turned his attention over to Lydia. "God bless you, Sister Lydia," he said, and he took her hand and kissed it. "It's good to finally have you home." Lydia quivered from the electric current that had pulsed from his lips into the back of her hand. It reminded her of the little boy in the parking lot. She was speechless. Pastor Faust suddenly raised his free hand to the ceiling and shouted into the microphone, "Thus saith the Lord, I see this young lady becoming a member of our church family in less than 2 years. Praise God, I see it clear as day." He laid a hand on Lydia's left shoulder and continued shouting. "We have before us here this morning a young lady who, from the ages of 17 to 21, fought the battle of a demon given the name of anorexia nervosa by the psychological community, and church, I'm here to tell you today that she won that battle. Sister, do you know how you did that?" Lydia's mouth hung open, but no sound came out of it. "God was watching over you then, Sister Lydia, so you'd live to see this day, the day you made your first trip from North Carolina to your true home. But you still have several issues to contend with before you're seen as pure enough in the eyes of the Lord to be called. Issues such as worldliness, jealousy, and apathy will become clear to you by the light of God's Word. You believe in evolution and in human evolution." The congregation gasped collectively. "I know, church, I can't believe it either. This young lady actually believes that man came from lowly animals. But that will change, thanks be to the Lord." The crowd cheered. Pastor Faust continued, "Sister Lydia, I prophesy that in less than 2 years you go on to write about me and the Open Arms Christian Church as the Lord sees fit. It will be a truly blessed event. Hallelujah." Before she could set her trembling body down, Lydia blacked out and landed on the floor in front of the single brother who happened to be standing behind her. It was Brian. The crowd cheered wildly. Lydia slowly came to, suddenly aware of what had just happened. Brian smiled down at her. Her grandmother was patting her forehead with a damp napkin and whispering something she couldn't quite make out. "Help me up," she managed to say. "Get me off this cold floor." Chapter 6. Brian chose the paved road over the well-worn path connecting the single brothers' houses to the church, and as he walked he thought about the lovely young woman. All the brothers' eyes had darted between him and Pastor Faust at the moment she fainted. He'd felt Jake's vicious stare when he helped the woman up, and he knew there would never be a way to explain that it was an accident that he just happened to be the one standing behind her. But on his way to the church that morning, he didn't worry too much about Jake. He only thought about how nice it was to suddenly find himself being her only support, cupping his hands in her armpits to help get her off the floor. Phil was standing in the front office when Brian arrived. "I'm glad you're here," he blurted out. Pastor Faust wants to have a meeting up in his office. I was just about to call you at home." Brian sighed and removed his jacket. "Do you know what this meeting is about?" "I just know Pastor Faust is up there waiting for us." "I wonder if I'm in trouble," Brian mumbled. "I don't think so." Phil adjusted his glasses. "Should you be?" "No, let's just go." Phil chattered all the way to the elevator and immediately silenced himself as soon as they set foot on the second floor. Brian was used to it and chalked it up to Phil's unbelievable reverence for Pastor Faust. Phil even considered the hallway to his office to be holy ground, and he removed his shoes before walking across the rug that stretched from the elevator to Pastor Faust's office door. Aidan let the two men in after the knock, with Brian entering first. Eduardo was the closest one to the door. Brian saw him before he noticed Bert, the newest committed eunuch, sitting on a sofa cushion on the floor near Pastor Faust's desk. He realized he wasn't in trouble. "But he's so new," he thought, not taking his eyes off Bert. "He's so new." Next section. Barbara had gone out of her way several times the following morning to come stare at Lydia. Sylvia didn't seem to notice. It was almost time to go to the church for breakfast, and Lydia stood in one of the upstairs bathrooms brushing her hair. Barbara strode down the hall and paused in the bathroom doorway for the fourth grin and stare. Lydia slowly set the brush down on the edge of the sink and returned Barbara's look. Barbara lowered her head and chuckled. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just that Pastor Faust—" "Oh, you probably wouldn't understand." "Why don't you just tell me?" "Has Brother Rich told you anything about Pastor Faust's ability to do what he did yesterday?" Lydia wanted to say all this woman's pastor did was freak her out in a way a tarot card reader in New Orleans had done the summer before, but she just shook her head and kept quiet. Barbara moved in closer and put her hand on Lydia's shoulder. "I don't know yet how much Bible knowledge you have, so bear with me. What Pastor Faust did for you was a thing that is known as prophecy. He even used that word. I prophesy that, and so on. We can learn about prophecy in the Bible. Pastor Faust is a very special man, a man we can trust." She looked into Lydia's eyes without blinking for about a minute. "Can you understand what I have just explained to you?" "I understand," Lydia said. And she thought to herself, "I don't believe a word of it, but I am capable of understanding spoken English. And stop staring at me, you psycho bitch lady." "That means that you'll be living here in less than 2 years. I'm already excited. And to think, I was one of the lucky ones to be there when it was first announced." She wrapped her arms around Lydia in a constricting hug. Sylvia peeked her head in the doorway, starting at the sight of Barbara squeezing her unfortunate granddaughter in the middle like a tube of toothpaste. "What are y'all doing in here?" she asked with a meager laugh. Barbara turned around and hugged Sylvia just as hard while Lydia caught her breath. "I'm just so happy," she said. Lydia got Sylvia's attention and gave her a wide-eyed, desperate expression. Well, I'm glad you're happy, Sylvia said. Would you like to share the reason? I'm just so excited to think of your little Lydia coming here. It's going to be so wonderful. All right, Sylvia said, faking a smile. I wanted to ask you about that. When he... Her face twisted up into worry. You know what? It's not really my place to discuss this with you. Maybe we could schedule a meeting with Pastor Faust, or if he's busy, Brother Ken could more than likely find the time to do it. He's a really great teacher. Just tell me what you told Liddy, Sylvia said. Anything you can tell her ought to be safe for my ears, too. Barbara let out a wisp of a laugh. That's what I was telling Lydia. What I was telling Lydia was that Pastor Faust has the gift of prophecy. That means he can tell us things that will happen in the future. I am familiar with the term. Okay, good. So anyway, we're all very excited at the news that Lydia will be coming here to live. Her facial expression changed quickly back to worry as she added, and I'm so sorry to hear about your granddaughter's condition. That's very sad. Condition, Sylvia said. What condition? She knew full well what Barbara meant. She just wanted to make her say it. Her eating disorder, Barbara whispered. For Liddy to have those thousands of eyes suddenly on her and then hear the words anorexia nervosa shouted over the PA system, it was nearly unbearable. She was convinced that it was shock that caused her to pass out, and as soon as she saw Richard again, she was going to string him up by his nose cartilage for blabbing. I've never known anyone who's gone through that, Barbara said, but I hear it's very challenging. The little hairs on the back of Liddy's neck stood on end, and she scowled. Barbara wasn't looking at her, but Sylvia was. Dr. Spellman announced from downstairs that he and Warren were ready to go, so the conversation ended there. Barbara left Lydia alone in the bathroom and escorted Sylvia downstairs. Lydia clamped both of her hands around the curved porcelain edges of the bathroom sink and stared hard at her reflection in the mirror. How did I get here? She said, not knowing where the question came from. She bowed her head and asked God to give her the strength to make it back home. Chapter 7. The brothers had a lot of work to do after their meeting, so nobody messed around after Pastor Faust was through with them. Brian searched the fellowship hall and the parking lot for Liddy, but the Spellmans had already taken Liddy and her grandparents to the activity center again, with the hopes of seeing Pastor Faust. Once again, they were told that Pastor Faust wasn't there, and no one seemed to know where he was. I can tell you one thing, Jake, who had just run into the activity center all red-faced and out of breath, said. He sure is looking forward to the breakfast. I haven't seen him yet this morning, but last night, right before he left, he was telling me just how blessed he is to have so many people here this year. He let out a sigh and gazed at them. God provides for those who ask. Good thing we got here early. It really is. Later on this morning, we'll be parking some cars in the parking lot at the old mall and shuttling the people out here in vans and buses. God bless us, Barbara said, swabbing her forehead with a napkin. Who would have believed it? Liddy had to admit she was impressed. The crowd in the activity center was already suffocating, and they still had about a half hour before the breakfast was officially scheduled to start. Let's go get our activity sheets for the day, Barbara said, taking Liddy by the hand and leading her up to the front of the room. Up on the stage, the church's teen choir, straight and narrow, was bouncing right along through some swinging gospel song Liddy had never heard before. And I actually wrote this song. I'm going to read the lyrics to you. I don't have any music for it. I'm getting up and moving on. I found the place where I belong. I found a place to leave my cares, because my burdens Christ will bear. And there's a blessing to receive for all of those who do believe. I'm getting up and moving on. OACC's where I belong. It sounded like an aerobics workout. Liddy listened intently to the words and felt the beat of the bass speakers vibrate in her gut while she inched along in line beside Barbara to get her list of daily activities. Those teenagers were belting out the lyrics with such energy and enthusiasm that the music came alive. It was infectious. And here's some more of the song. Seems that lately I can't hide the smile that's on my face. I'm getting up, I'm moving on to join this holy race. Nothing in the world can touch what Jesus Christ can bring. That's why I've said goodbye to all my old desires and things. Now in a world that's full of sin, where Satan's at my door, it's nice to know I've got the open arms forevermore. When darkness seems to fill your life and nothing's what it seemed, you know that God's a loving God. He fills your every need. I'm getting up and moving on. I found the place where I belong. I found a place to leave my cares, because my burdens Christ will bear. And there's a blessing to receive for all of those who do believe. I'm getting up and moving on. OACC's where I belong. In all my years on this old earth, in all my years of pain, I never knew what true love was till Christ within me reigned. So with his love, saved by his blood, I march along with pride, and at the open arms I'm safe, I'm finally satisfied. Now in this world you'll find a lot of lies and Satan's schemes, and you may think he's found the path that leads to all your dreams. But it's the blood of the Lord above that really takes you home. I'm in the arms of my sweet Lord, never more to roam. Oh gosh, there's more. And then we get into some repetitive stuff with the lyrics. It says, I'm getting up, I'm moving on, I'm moving on. I found the place where I belong. I found a place to leave my cares, and in this place the open arms, sweet Jesus takes my share. Oh, I'm getting up, I'm moving on. Oh, there's a blessing we can receive for all of us who do believe. I'm getting up and moving on. I found the place where I belong. I found a place to leave my cares because my burdens Christ will bear, and there's a blessing to receive for all of those who do believe. I'm getting up and moving on. OACC's where I belong. Lydia smiled reflexively when one of the girls on stage caught her eye and winked. There it is again, she thought. She took another look at the teenagers, a long, hard look. They don't look alike, but they seem to have something. Aren't they fabulous? Barbara strained to say above the music. They're really good, Lydia said. Finally, they reached the front of the line and took some folded pieces of paper from Ken, who was sitting on the edge of the stage with a couple other brothers. Lydia was just about to ask Barbara if she thought she'd get to see Richard that day when Barbara dumped her off with her family and took off into the teeming mass of people in the middle of the room. Lydia unfolded the pieces of paper Barbara had stuffed in her hand. All right now, she yelled, trying to drown out the music, which had dramatically increased in volume since they first arrived. It looks like there will be about 15 Bible studies going on today till lunchtime, and they're all out of doors because, according to this, there should be anywhere from 500 to 1,000 people in each one. My God, that's a lot. She folded the papers back up and looked at Sylvia. Can I go with y'all? No, I don't think so, honey. You'll have to go with the single women's Bible study unless there's another one that fits you. Lydia made a face at Sylvia and then looked back down at the sheet. I guess I'll be going to the single women's thing. Can't we just say I'm married? It's not like we'll ever see any of these people again. You'll be fine, Sylvia said. Brian was already sitting under tent C with some other out-of-towners, and he saw Lydia as soon as she arrived. He had to act quickly, and almost without hesitation, he unzipped his Bible case and snatched a blank piece of paper out of an inside pocket. He scribbled something on it, folded the paper up into a 1-inch square, and got up from the table. Lydia and her grandparents were seated with Archie's family and shaking hands with people nearby when he reached them. Good morning, folks, he said, taking care not to look at Lydia longer than anyone else. We sure are glad to have you here today. Looks like we've got a whole table of nothing but visitors here. I'm Brother Brian Beauchamp. He shook someone's hand. God bless you. He went around the table shaking hands with everybody, leaving Lydia for the very end. The note was tucked safely away in his shirt sleeve, and he palmed it just before he got to her. Lydia smiled and reached for his outstretched hand, not recognizing him at first as being the man who caught her when she fainted the day before. Then she felt the piece of paper in her hand, saw the insistent look on his face when he pulled his hand away, and it all fit together. She tucked the paper in the waistband of her skirt. He left without saying another word. The conversation at the table slowly shifted to other things, and when she felt it was safe, she bent down and opened the note Brian had given her. She could scarcely make out his all-caps block writing. I would love to get to know you better. Meet me at the Dalton Fisher Park tonight at midnight. The rest of the day was a total drag for poor Liddy. One of the ladies recommended that since she'd be a member of the church someday and needed to begin presenting the proper image, she really should go back to the Spellmans and change. She had to track down Barbara to drive her there after breakfast. Liddy had no clothes that Barbara felt were appropriate, so she ended up borrowing a skirt from Barbara that fit like a burlap sack. That set an angry tone for the rest of the day, and then having to sit through 3 hours of Bible study on the woman's role in the Christian world made it worse. The only thing that helped her get through it was the thought of sneaking out that night to see Brian. It was becoming obvious to her that she wasn't going to see much of Richard anyway, so she might as well go have some fun. Everyone in the Spellman house was ready to crawl in bed by 10 o'clock that night. Liddy wore pajamas, but under the comforter of her bed she had carefully tucked away a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt. She said her good nights and went up to her room to change clothes and wait. Brian managed to finish up all his tasks at the church early and made it back to home by 11. Most of the time he was at the church working until at least midnight. He too went to his bedroom to wait. Then at 11:30 he climbed out the window, ran across the third floor balcony, and jumped down to the ground as soundlessly as he could. But 3 stories is a long way to jump. He twisted his ankle and had to hobble all the way back to the church. Jake's car was waiting in the church's main parking lot, and Brian had managed to sneak the extra key for it out of the front office. Lydia was already at the park by the time Brian arrived. She'd run all the way from the Spellman's house, so afraid she'd get caught. He approached her slowly, his emotions swinging from guilt to elation and then back to guilt again. She met him halfway across the playground and shook his hand warmly. "Hi. Hey. I'm glad you came. I'm glad you asked me." Chapter 8. Jake heard a distinct thump come from Brian's room. He continued to lie in bed for another minute, then heard what he believed to be the window pane sliding up. Looking out the window, he saw the shadow of a person moving quickly across the balcony, and then it just seemed to disappear. He went to Brian's room and found it empty, although he'd just spoken to Brian 20 minutes earlier when he was supposedly on his way to bed. He called the church to see if Pastor Faust was still there. Pastor Faust had left, but Ken was still in his office. "Brother Ken, Dad, Father," all these years he still wasn't sure which of those sounded right. "Yeah, Jake? I think Brother Brian's in trouble. Could you go look out in the parking lot and see if my car's there?" "Hang on." Jake waited, and Ken came back on the line a few minutes later, all out of breath. "I just ran upstairs to the front office and had the security camera pan the main lot, and I didn't see your car. You usually park there, don't you?" "Yeah. Well, it's not there." "Oh, Lord." "Why do you think Brother Brian's in trouble?" "I just heard him leave the house. He went through the window and then jumped off the balcony and took off. Now my car's gone and he has the keys to it." "Come on back to the church," Ken said. "We'll go look for him." After Jake got there, they decided that Fisher was the first place to check. They drove up and down Main Street, even circling some of the bars and hangouts, but saw no sign of Jake's car or Brian. It was almost an hour later when they finally passed the park in Dalton and saw them there. Next section. Sylvia, Warren, and the Spellmans were in the living room when Ken dropped Lydia off. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. Barbara sighed as she watched Ken go out the door. "Feel free to use the living room if you want to talk." "Thank you," Sylvia said. "We will." Barbara and her husband trudged back up the stairs, whispering harshly back and forth as they went. Lydia and her grandparents sat down in the living room. Sylvia looked over at Lydia after she heard the Spellman's bedroom door closed. "I'm surprised at you," she snapped. "I don't care what you go out and do at night when you're at home, but when you're staying with somebody else, you just don't do this sort of thing." "Okay, for the record, I don't go out and do things like this at home. I'm just mad, Grandma." "Mad? You go out in the middle of the night with God knows who because you're mad? What have you got to be mad about?" "I haven't seen Richard in 5 years, and now I've taken an entire week off work and bought a plane ticket and sat through a bunch of Bible studies, and I still haven't gotten to spend more than 5 minutes with him." "That doesn't give you the right to sneak out of this house," Sylvia said. "Do you know how embarrassing this is for Warren and me?" "I'm sorry. I didn't think we'd get caught." "Who were you out there with?" "I'm surprised that Ken guy didn't announce it, actually." "Tell us who it is, Liddy," Warren said. Liddy looked at Warren and then at Sylvia. "It was Brian, the guy who helped me up at the breakfast when I fainted." "Oh, Lord," Sylvia said. You running off with some guy you met at the convenience store somewhere is one thing, but a brother in the church?" She buried her head in her hands. "My God, Liddy, Richard's going to be so disappointed in you." "Why would he be disappointed in just me? I wasn't going to say anything, but it was Brian's idea that we meet out there. I was glad for the chance to go do something that even remotely resembled fun, since I haven't done that since we got here. Damn, I need a cigarette." Sylvia huffed. This wasn't supposed to be a fun trip. We're here to get to know Richard's church and to spend time. It's about praising God, Liddy, not fun." Chapter 9. Liddy was numb by the time she actually got to sit down and eat her breakfast the following morning. The people around her were talking and laughing and having a wonderful time, but Liddy was stuck in a fog. Sylvia felt the entire mass of people under Tent D staring at her and her family. They've all heard, she imagined. They all know what Liddy was out doing with one of their brothers last night. Look at 'em watching us. The sun slowly climbed up into the sky while the people ate their breakfast, and as they finished, they began to turn their attention to their activity sheets for the day. "I suggest you go straight to your Bible study," Sylvia said to Lydia. "Okay." "And then meet us back here in this same place for lunch." "I will." Brian was stuck monitoring one of the parking lots almost all the way through breakfast as punishment. He could only go eat after Ken was sure everybody had been served. The single brothers had no classes to attend. Brothers not assigned to teach class were directed to circulate among the Bible studies and observe the visitors' behavior. They were also instructed to strike up conversations with the out-of-town guests at every opportunity. That's what Brian was supposed to be doing in the parking lot, talking to latecomers and directing them to the tents for their morning meal. Instead, he leaned up against a van in the eastern tip of his assigned parking lot, dozing in the warm glow of the sun. He hadn't slept. As a special treat, Richard came to join his family for the last 10 minutes of the breakfast. Sylvia was so relieved to finally see him again that she begged him to stay longer. "I can't," he said. "There's just way too much to do. Anyway, y'all have a Bible study to go to, right? Maybe I'll see you at lunch." He gingerly picked up his full cup and unfinished plate of food and disappeared into the crowd. Lydia didn't even have time to fuss at him about telling Pastor Faust about her personal problems. Sylvia watched Richard walk away. "Don't you think that was a little odd?" she asked Warren. He just looked at her. They got up to leave. Lydia went in one direction, Sylvia and Warren went in the other. Lydia had been chosen in the previous evening's Bible study to be in Section A of the Single Ladies' Studies, and that one was being held outside behind the sanctuary. For a short distance she walked along with a group of young women headed in that direction, but then suddenly darted off to the side to walk alone. Turning the corner around the back side of the church, she spotted him. He was standing not 10 yards away, and he was watching her. No one seemed to be looking in their direction. Brian began walking toward her, and she didn't slow down. Just as they passed each other, he held 3 fingers up and nodded. She knew what it meant, and they kept walking. Chapter 10. From the largest window in his office, Pastor Faust could see 2 of the tents and a small portion of the main parking lot. After lunch was over, he stood staring out that window at the people milling about on the grass and zigzagging across the parking lot. "We're going to exceed our expected total attendance," he said to no one, but Aidan heard him and came upstairs from the sanctuary. "You're right about that," he said, making Pastor Faust jump. "It's a wonderful turnout, Charles. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." Pastor Faust turned around. "Did you just say you were proud of me? You, the one who wanted so bad to teach me patience and humility?" "I'm proud of the work you've done," Aidan said. "That doesn't necessarily mean I'm proud of the way you've treated me or the men here. We made it through all right." "Not yet. Not all of you." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you don't have true devotion," Aidan said, approaching the window. "If you did, your little sheep wouldn't have gone off to the park last night to meet Brother Rich's sister. It goes against everything you've tried to teach him. It only takes one apple to ruin them all." "Well, what am I supposed to do?" Pastor Faust asked, irritated. "Oh, now, Charles, I can't tell you everything. What's the fun in never having to discover anything for yourself?" Chapter 11. At bedtime, Lydia had once again stashed her jeans and sweatshirt under her comforter. The only difference this time, and she hoped she'd read the signal correctly, was that she'd set her alarm for 2:30 and sleep until then. That would give her 30 minutes to change clothes, climb out the window, and get to the park. For about 20 minutes after she arrived at the park, she spun herself around on the merry-go-round, never once looking for Brian, lost in the forgotten job of whirling around upside down. The ride halted suddenly, and Lydia looked up at the hand on one of the iron bars. "Let me help you up," Brian said, and he gently took both of her hands. Brian, like most of the other brothers, had gained a lot of weight since joining the ministry. Parishioners in the church referred to it as growing fat in the Lord, and it was common. Among the brothers, Ken referred to the OACC ladies' auxiliary as the herd. Nobody made fun of the fat eunuchs. Lydia had tried hard since the night before not to pay attention to his size. It was highly unlikely that she'd ever see him again anyway, and they were just out there for fun. Lydia sat up on the merry-go-round. "What time is it?" "It's 3:05. Do you think those guys will come after us again tonight?" Brian scanned the boundaries of the playground all the way up the hill to the side street where Ken and Jake had parked the night before. Then he turned back to Lydia. "That's the main reason why I wanted to meet you a little later tonight. I figured they'd all be asleep by now for sure. Not that I care what they think or anything." Chapter 12. Pastor Faust was roused from sleep at about 4 o'clock that morning. He squinted into the dark to see no one. "Hello," he whispered. "It's me," Aiden said. "I need to talk to you." Ruby sat up quickly, startled by the voices. "Go back to sleep, sister," Aiden said. "It's just church business talk. Sorry we woke you." Ruby laid herself back down and covered her head with the silk sheet. Pastor Faust stumbled out of bed and let Aiden guide him out of the bedroom and into the hallway. Aiden shut the bedroom door. "All right," Pastor Faust said. "You know I never bother you at night unless it's something urgent. I came here tonight because I thought you'd like to know your rebellious little sheep has jumped the fence again." "Who are you talking about?" "Brian Beauchamp. He's back out at the park with Richard's sister right now." "That whore!" Pastor Faust trembled with anger. "I think this proves the point I was making earlier today." "It doesn't prove anything," Pastor Faust said. "All it does is indicate to me that boy's worse off than I thought. Regular punishment won't work with him, obviously, so we have to find out what does." Aiden held a hand up. "I wouldn't be too hasty." "Why not? I can call the church and have a couple brothers out there in less than 20 minutes. Then I can have Brian brought to my office and I'll meet him there." "That wouldn't work," Aiden said. "He sees all this. The interrogations, the punishment, the attempts at humiliation is a big joke. He believes in his heart that you preach the truth, but as far as he's concerned, the structures and rules of the ministry are just a game. You don't want to try to beat him into submission, Charles." "Okay, then, what do you suggest I do?" "Wait. Wait until you can get them together in a more civilized setting." "But wait how long?" "Just have patience, Charles." Next section. Lydia crawled back through the bedroom window at 6:05 that morning, just before Sylvia came to make sure she was up. She had enough time to jump under the covers and say groggily that she was awake when Sylvia knocked on the door. "My goodness," Barbara said when she saw Lydia come downstairs. "Don't your eyes look red?" "I think it's my allergies acting up," Lydia said, and she looked away. "Ragweed season or something." "Oh, well, let's see what you're wearing. Dear, let's go back upstairs into my spare closet and see what we can find you to change into." She glanced at Sylvia, who was sitting at the kitchen table with her cup of coffee. "No offense. I'm sure you understand." "I understand," Sylvia said. "Thank you for letting her borrow your clothes again. I think maybe tonight after the seminar I'll take her to get some other clothes instead of going to Vespers. Hopefully we'll be able to find a store open that late. We could leave the church before dinner instead of waiting till later if you think we'd stand a better chance." "That's not necessary," Barbara said. "We really ought not miss dinner or the evening prayers. I'm sure I've got enough stuff here that she can borrow to last her through the conference." Barbara led Lydia back upstairs. "Do you like avocado green?" Sylvia stared out the window at the apple trees in the Spellmans' backyard and took a deep breath. Warren still hadn't come downstairs yet, and Dr. Spellman had taken the other car to get to church early. Ken and Jake needed help assembling more meat greet packets, so Dr. Spellman had said. All Sylvia knew was that somebody from the church had called at about 6 o'clock that morning and asked him to get to church as quickly as possible. Warren came downstairs a minute or two later, still half asleep and wearing wrinkled pants. "Oh, Warren," Sylvia said, "why didn't you hang those up somewhere? I'll have to iron them before we can go." "Sorry," he said, "but I'm just not used to having to wear church clothes 7 days in a row. I thought it'd be a little more casual than this. Where is everybody?" "Barbara's upstairs dressing Liddy, and Dr. Spellman's already left for the church," Sylvia said. "It's just you and me down here." "Well, what's Barbara dressing Liddy for?" "Liddy's clothes weren't decent. She came downstairs in a pantsuit. Can you imagine her thinking it'd be all right to go to church in pants?" "Well, if it's all she's got, yeah." "I don't know if it was all she had or not. Barbara was nice enough to let her wear some of her clothes." Warren looked down at his pants. "I guess they are a little wrinkled. They look like a relief map." They made it to church within the hour. Barbara had dressed Liddy in a green double-knit jumper dress with a plaid nylon shirt and white tights. Lucky me, Liddy thought. She even had a pair of Mary Janes in my size. I look like I should be skipping rope somewhere. After getting her breakfast, Liddy sat at the end of one of the tables under tent G. No one spoke to her for a few minutes, and she was able to catch snippets of nearby conversations. Here's one of the conversations she overheard. "So thanks to that, I had a chance to make it to the salon on Saturday between lookups. I thought I'd try a new color this time instead of just doing my roots, since my stylist Bruce said it was able to convince me to make my face look thinner. It's really a big change from what I had, but isn't it the cutest color? My nails are a mess, but hopefully after next week..." Here's another conversation. "I can't believe she actually thought she could hold an office in the ladies' auxiliary.
I mean, look at her teeth. They're a mess. What kind of message would that send to new members? They probably think we were a bunch of backward... And another conversation shared. Didn't know what to think when she said that. It was all I could do to keep from laughing right there in her face. Of course, I went and told Sister Hannah about it. That's the right thing to do. But when I told Sister Gabby what she... And then I told Sister Gabby what she said. Can you believe she thinks she's good enough to try out for choir? She couldn't carry a tune if her life depended... Lydia looked up slowly at these women. Women that Barbara had promised her she'd have so much in common with. The one sitting to her right wasn't participating in any of the conversations. She looked over at Lydia and smiled. Hey, hello. Are you from one of the other churches? No, I'm here visiting my brother Richard. He goes to this church. My name's Drusilla Fillmore. I'm Stu's brother Stewart's cousin. I'm Lydia Roberts. You can call me Drew. Okay, I usually go by Liddy. A large dark-haired woman about 3 chairs down from Drew stood up and pointed dramatically at Liddy. Oh my God, she cried out. You're the one Pastor Faust prophesied about. She stumbled back away from her chair and moved in awkward steps between the tent supports and chairs that stood between her and Liddy. It's so nice to meet you. Let me shake your hand, sister. Liddy extended her hand and felt the power grip. She laughed nervously. It's nice to meet you. Wow, the woman said, breathless. Everyone under the tent was watching the two of them. It's such an honor to have you here. Do you know that's the first prophecy Pastor Faust has revealed to us in months? She was still holding Liddy's hand. You are so lucky. Pastor Faust has only prophesied one thing about me. Of course it came true, though, thanks be to the Lord. Well, obviously you know who I am, Liddy said. I don't believe I've met you before now. The woman let Liddy's hand go with a thrust and placed her hand on her chest. Where are my manners? Please forgive me. She had a cleft in her chin that Liddy couldn't stop staring at. She'd only seen cleft chins on men until that moment. I'm Sister Andra Vasquez, she said, and she shook Liddy's hand again. It is so nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you too, Liddy said, and then thought, now sit down so everybody can go back to not noticing me. It was too late. Before she knew what was happening, Andra had swept Liddy out of her seat to take her around to meet everybody under the tent. I'm never going to remember all these names, Liddy said. Don't worry about it. You'll remember them soon enough after you've lived here a while. I've been in the church for about 3 years, and I can tell you, when I first got baptized, I couldn't remember anybody's name either. It gets easier. Liddy shook some more hands and smiled. But I'll have 2 years to wait until then, so your pastor said. No, he said 2 years at the most. It could be a week, a month, 6 months, who knows? If you listen to God, you'll know when the time has come for you to make the move. Maybe you'll stay here after the conference and never go back where you came from. Yeah. Liddy was a long way from her seat. I'm really hungry. Do you mind if I go sit back down? Andrew looked over at Liddy's seat, then at Drew. Why don't you come squeeze in over here where I'm sitting? We'll make room. That way we can talk. All the ladies near Andrew's seat smiled and nodded vigorously. I guess I'd be all right. Andrew gave her a quick little hug. Come on, I'll carry your plate and stuff and you grab your chair. Liddy had never been around a group of women so interested in hearing about her life. Every lady around that table leaned in to listen to her, totally enthralled in every bit of trivial information she had to share. She couldn't stop herself from telling them everything she could think of. The only awkward silence throughout breakfast came when she started telling them about her college years. No one seemed to have anything to add to that except that it must be nice to get to go to college. I always wanted to go, said one of the sisters wistfully, but you know how life can get in the way. Not everybody's as lucky as you were. I got married really young and then had a couple kids. And then the divorce her face firmed up and she added, but at least I've had the privilege of being one of God's servants. Ah, yes, Liddy said, not sure what the appropriate response would have been. She bristled at the sister's use of the word lucky in reference to her college career. You don't have to work 35 hours a week in a crappy drugstore to pay your rent and tuition if you've got luck, she thought. The world teaches us to go after our own selfish desires instead of what God wants us to do, another woman added. I'm sure you've heard that before. Once you're a member of the church, that'll finally be as clear to you as the air you breathe. She smiled broadly. Liddy was going to comment further on her choice to go to college, a defense for that choice, which she felt was somehow being questioned, but something stopped her. She just sat there silently, letting the ladies talk. Chapter 13. Come in. Sit down. Pastor Faust watched Brian move from the office doorway to the chair in front of his desk. I've heard some disturbing news about you. What would that be, sir? Why don't you tell me? Brian shifted in the seat and picked at a bit of lint on his pant leg. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I'm sorry. You know exactly what I mean. Why not admit it to me now and save me the trouble of saying it? Brian looked up. Is it about what I did last night? Pastor Faust nodded. I don't know what got into me, Brian said eagerly. It's just Liddy, Brother Rich's sister, she... Save it. I know where you were and what you were doing last night when you were supposed to be in your room asleep. Brian wasn't sure what else he should say, or if he should say anything at all. You stole Brother Jake's car. You snuck out when you knew you were supposed to be in bed asleep. You associated with that girl. It's like you... He suddenly stood up and walked to the window. I'll tell you what, he said without looking at Brian. You figure out what you need to do to make this up to me. You also need to make it up to your brothers in this ministry. Then you come back to me in a week with your plan, and I'll decide whether or not you even get to remain a member of this church. How's that sound? Brian was shocked into silence. I said, how's that sound? Pastor Faust said, even louder than the first time. Brian jumped. Yes, sir, I'll do that. Please don't. I'll come up with something good. Don't you say you're sorry. Don't you dare. Get out of my sight. Chapter 14. Brother Carl Steele had barely set his bags down in the hotel bedroom when he heard a knock at the door. He opened it to find Aiden standing there. Hello again, Carl, Aiden said, brushing past and entering the room. It's good to finally have you here. He surveyed Carl's new luggage with approval. Nice. Is that leather? I thought I deserved something special for the 25th conference, Carl said. What took you so long to get here? You were supposed to fly up 3 days ago. Charles had the ticket sent to you. Some of the brothers needed last-minute help to get here. I really wanted them to be able to come, but they just didn't have the funds to pay for the trip themselves. I'd give anything to have a more positive cash flow in the church and fewer of these minimum wage limitations. I've been working really hard to recruit new men. Did any of the families need your help? Carl sighed. 2 families did. We managed to get them all loaded up in vans to drive up. I don't think they're too crowded. Hopefully they'll be here tonight in time for dinner. No one objected to you flying? Why would they? Carl asked. They knew I needed to get here as soon as I could to help Charles out. How could I be expected to waste time driving up or riding in the van with them? He looked over at his new luggage. And why ride in a cramped-up old van when I can stretch out in first class? Let's head over to the church, Aiden said. I have a car and driver waiting out front. Next section. Pastor Faust sent Stuart to go pick up Carl at the hotel in the church's limousine. Stuart saw it as an unnecessary imposition on his week's vacation, but went without saying a word. Look at this, Carl said with gritted teeth as he slid across the rear leather seat of the car. I don't have a limousine. Aiden wasn't paying attention. He was too busy talking to Stuart over the intercom. Brother Stuart, we need to go by Pastor Faust's house before we stop at the church, please. Stuart said that would be no problem. Carl looked at Aiden. What do we need to stop there for? I thought you were in a hurry to get to the church. When was the last time you were in Dalton Fisher? It's been, I guess, about 2 years. Why? A lot's changed in 2 years. Aiden smiled and patted Carl on the shoulder. Feel free to stretch out. That's what a stretch limo's for. Did you know that Charles's house has 6 bedrooms? Carl sneered and turned toward the window. You've always known my heart, he said. I beg your pardon? I want it all, Aiden. Wanting it isn't enough. You've always wanted it. Things change. You'll do as you're told? Carl was silent. Carl? I will. Yes. Do you have the patience? Yes. You'll do everything I tell you? Aiden asked. Yes, everything. All right then, Aiden said, and clicked the intercom back on. Stuart, would you please drop us off on River Road at the bridge? We can walk to the church from there, so you don't have to wait for us. Thank you. He turned the intercom off. Carl turned away from the window and looked at Aiden. What are we stopping at the river for? For your baptism, Aiden said. He smiled and looked straight ahead. Chapter 15. Lydia went to the designated tent to put down all her study material before heading to the lunch buffet lines with the rest of the single ladies. Almost 4 hours of classes after breakfast that morning had left her swimmy-headed and fatigued. There was never a minute to stop and rest. Andrew led her by the hand to the buffet. A server gave her a plate, and she moved down the table toward the salad items. Hundreds of people were gravitating toward the food as their classes ended, and Lydia scanned the crowds for Richard or her grandparents.
They were nowhere to be seen, and the only people she had to talk to were the single ladies. Andrews was the only name she could remember. "So," Andrews said, moving toward a tub of potato salad, "what do you think of the open arms so far?" "It's big," Liddy said. "Everybody's always so busy. I know Richard has—" "It's not that bad except during conference," the lady behind Liddy said. Liddy noticed some chocolate smears around her mouth. "Normally we're more laid back than this, but conference is a time when we really juice it up, you know?" She leaned forward and surveyed the goods that lay ahead of them. "Look at all that beautiful food." "It must cost a fortune to do something like this. I mean, especially for an entire week," Liddy said. "Y'all must be doing something right to be able to afford it." "The Lord has truly blessed," Andrew said, "but we try not to focus too much on money or material things. The only thing about money we really think about is what it can do to further our ministry. And having meals here at the church gives everybody a chance to eat together in fellowship, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you look at it that way, the money spent is really a bargain. It helps us bring lost souls to Christ." She balanced 3 walnut brownies on the edge of her plate. "Let's hurry up and get back to the table so we can see who's there." Drew was still sitting in her same seat, all alone, and the ladies were all either at the opposite end of her table or at another table under the tent. Lydia noticed this and felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of revulsion toward Drew. She was a pathetic sight, hunching over her plate and tearing her hamburger bun apart. Andrew saw Lydia watching Drew. She patted Lydia's arm and said, "Christian fellowship is so important to us ladies. Good Christian fellowship, I mean." She glared at Drew, who still hadn't looked up. "It's too easy for us to backslide without it." Lydia nodded. They took their seats. "Hey," the lady sitting 2 seats down from Lydia said. "Sister Lydia?" "Yeah?" "I think you're in my group for one of this evening's Bible studies. We'll be discussing baptism." She stood up and moved closer to Lydia, speaking in a more confidential tone. "Has Brother Rich ever talked to you about the necessity of proper baptism?" "No, I don't think. You'll be surprised to learn that most people don't know the whole truth about baptism. I won't get into it right now, but I'm so glad I'll be a part of your class." She walked back over to her seat. "So you be sure to get up with me and we'll walk together, okay?" "Okay." Suddenly the PA speaker above their heads crackled to life with Pastor Faust's voice. "Greetings, OACC visitors, staff, and congregations. Boy, what a turnout we have here. I just got the official total for today, and Brother Ken says we've got about 15,000 people on the grounds at this very moment. Praise God. You know, I remember a time not too long ago when we were in the storefront church on Waltham Street in Dalton, and I prophesied this very thing. A meeting of the congregations of the Open Arms Christian churches from across the globe, and we'd have upwards of 10,000 people in attendance. Back in our storefront church, people laughed at that. They made jokes about it, but I tell you something, folks, they're not laughing now." Andrew and some of the other ladies nodded and smiled. "Amen," they said. "Look at this beautiful bunch of people," Pastor Faust said. "I'm over here by Tent P, and I'm so happy to be associated with the folks I see here in front of me right now. And wherever you are, whatever tent you're under, the same goes for you. All this, the people, the conference, the ministry, it was all revealed to me way back when I was just 19 years old on that dirt road in North Carolina. I was met on that road by the face and body of Jesus Christ. I had the vision, and praise the Lord, we made it." Applause and shouts of joy thundered forth from every tent. Drew remained unresponsive, choosing instead to stare at her drink cup. Lydia watched her. Pastor Faust cleared his throat and continued, "I have a very special announcement to make, brothers and sisters. Many of you have wondered and even asked me when Brother Carl Steele from our Baton Rouge church would be coming. Brother Carl is already in town. I sent Brother Stewart to pick him up, so we're just waiting for them to get back. Boy, it's been a long time since Brother Carl came to the Dalton Fisher Church. I can't even remember. What'd you say, Brother Ken? It was 2 years ago? My goodness, I love conference. It's just like a big old family reunion, isn't it?" Andrew chuckled and shouted, "Amen, Pastor Faust, amen." "Well, what do we have here?" Pastor Faust said. "I think I see. It is. Here comes Brother Carl." The PA system speakers squealed and went into a thumping sound as Pastor Faust ran the full length of Tent P to reach Carl, who was walking alone through the grass from the woods. Mud from the riverbank was still caked on the soles of his shoes. Before Pastor Faust could say another word, Carl covered the microphone with his hand and whispered, "I did it." "You did what?" Pastor Faust said, looking back and grinning at the people standing behind him.
He removed Carl's hand from the microphone. "What are you talking about? Come on up. Everybody's waiting to see you." "I finally did it, Charles." Pastor Faust held the microphone away from his face and looked around. "Where's Aiden?" "He's coming." "Have mercy, Carl. You're going to love it." Chapter 16. Lydia's class on baptism ran a little long enough that she totally missed the one on cheerful giving. Andrew told her not to worry about it because, as she put it, time spent learning how souls are truly saved is never time wasted. Lydia didn't care one way or the other. All she wanted to do was crawl back in bed. She propped her head up in her hands, too weary to exert the energy needed to sit up straight. Her dinner of Salisbury steak and a baked potato sat forgotten in her plate. "There's such a blessing right here under this tent," Andrew sighed. "You know it? All these visiting ladies. I've gotten to know so many new people this week. It's just such a wonderful thing God's done with this church. And then tonight we'll have so many baptisms. I bet we'll be out there half the night. Praise God." "We," Liddy thought. "I don't know about this we crap." Andrew turned to Liddy. "Sister, did you enjoy your class on baptism today?" "It was good. Long, but good." "Have you given any consideration to baptism for yourself?" Liddy saw the eagerness on Andrew's face and sighed. "I don't know. I mean, all the scriptures the teacher pointed out to us made sense, but it still isn't." "You sound like you got a little confused in the class." "I'm not confused like I couldn't understand what was being said. What confused me was the fact that the guy said I'd have to pray and maybe even talk to a pastor before I really know if I'm ready to be baptized. I don't see where it'd do me any harm to do it." "Maybe you should talk to Pastor Faust or Brother Ken about it. They could confirm that for you if you think." "No, I think I can go for it tonight." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, why not?" Andrew stood up and shouted, "Praise you, Jesus! Ladies, I want to share with you that Sister Lydia over here has just informed me that she wishes to be baptized tonight. Isn't that fantastic? Sister Lydia, we are so happy to know we'll be welcoming you into the fellowship tonight. Thank you, Lord." All the ladies applauded, and the sisters sitting close to Lydia either shook her hand or hugged her. After that, a few other visitors announced that they had decided to be baptized that night, too. The excitement and noise level under the tent grew, and it got other people's attention. Pastor Faust, who was all the way over at Tent T, picked up his microphone and said, "I think we got ourselves some church going on over there at one of those ladies' tents. Praise the Lord, I love our single ladies. If it wasn't for them, who'd cook all that good food for our fellowship luncheons?" "I'm just kidding, ladies. You're good for prettying up the place, too. Just listen to them over there. God bless them." Every tent cheered and applauded, and Pastor Faust went back to eating. Sylvia and Warren, like everyone else at the conference, had attended a class on baptism that day. They read all the scriptures and paid attention, but so many things about the church's doctrine went against what they believed that they didn't know whether being baptized in this church was a good idea or not. But like Liddy, they really didn't see what harm it could do. It's always a good thing when people get baptized, they thought. "I doubt Liddy's one of the ones over there hooping and hollering," Sylvia whispered to Warren. "You know how she is about religion." "I wish somebody could reach her," Warren said, "but I've always thought that somebody would be us." Maybe it wasn't meant to be us maybe it wasn't meant to be for us to be the ones to finally get to her. Maybe God wants these people to do it. If Pastor Faust's prophecy comes true, and she really does move out here, that'll more than likely be the case. "I don't know about that prophecy," Warren said. He stopped and thought for a minute. "I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens." After dinner, everyone went to their evening classes, then on to the evening prayer service, then down to the river for the baptisms. The brothers had reported to the church early that morning to string up outdoor lights which illuminated a wide path from the church to the riverbank. A large spotlight was set up to shine on Pastor Faust's wooden platform. Liddy walked slowly as she had been told to do, watching her steps so she didn't fall. "You said these overalls are a medium, right?" She asked Andrew. "They're the biggest medium I've ever seen, if they are." "I remember when I got baptized, I could wear a medium pair of those overalls as easy as you can," Andrew said. "Now I'd be lucky if I could squeeze into an extra large. But praise God, he's really blessed me the 8.5 years I've been here." They heard thunder off in the distance. "Do you think it's a good idea to be out here with a thunderstorm coming?" Lydia asked. "Pastor Faust will take care of us. We're in good hands. But how can he—" Sister Patrice Lafayette ran up behind Andrew and grabbed her. "Gotcha!" Andrew nearly fell backwards from the shock. "Oh, Sister Patrice, you know better than to sneak up behind somebody like that. You scared me half to death." They walked along in silence the rest of the way. A large group up ahead of Lydia was singing a hymn, but she couldn't figure out what it was. It didn't sound like anything she'd ever heard before. She held up the legs of the overalls to keep from tripping as she goose-stepped through the tall grass and weeds. The brothers worked quickly to arrange the crowd at the riverbank, moving the ones who wanted to be baptized closer to the platform where Pastor Faust was standing. Ken stood just a few feet away from that platform. Lydia worked her way to the front of the army of overalls and looked around. She didn't see any of her family. "Praise God," Pastor Faust spoke into his lapel microphone, which he was holding gingerly between his right thumb and index finger. "We're so glad to have all of you here tonight. I know people are still on their way down here to join us, but hopefully you're all within the sound of my voice by now. I've been told we have here tonight the largest gathering of people who wish to be baptized that we've had in the church's entire history. In fact, there are so many that there's no way we'd have time for me to personally baptize every one of you. Tonight we'll bury in the name of the Lord over 3,000 people, and they'll go forth from this place all across the globe to walk in the newness of life. Amen to that." A terrifying clap of thunder shook the ground and startled the crowd. A few people bolted back toward the church. "Hang on a minute," Pastor Faust said. "Everybody relax. There's nothing to be afraid of." "The heck you say," Lydia muttered. "I'm not about to get in that water." A brother standing near her told her not to be afraid. She just turned the other way and rolled her eyes. A soft rain could be heard falling in the darkened woods, and lightning streaked across the sky. Pastor Faust clipped his microphone to his shirt and raised his hands to the sky. "Where's your faith?" he shouted. The crowd waited as the rain slowly moved toward them. Let the storm touch not God's anointed, nor the people under his covering," Pastor Faust said. He stepped off the platform and into the water. People in the crowd had pulled out plastic ponchos and umbrellas, but there was no need. Rain came down in torrents all around them, but not a single person in the crowd of nearly 12,000 felt a drop of it. No water ran over the ground at their feet or soaked the leaves of the trees nearby. A silence ensued, then a mighty cheer that almost subdued the thunder. Lydia could hardly believe her eyes. "This is the day that the Lord has made," Pastor Faust shouted, still holding his hands skyward. "We will rejoice and be glad in it." Lydia couldn't control herself. "Hallelujah!" she shouted. "Praise the Lord!" She was the first one to be baptized. Chapter 17. Aiden grew tired of the baptisms after the first half hour and went back to Pastor Faust's office to relax. He knew Pastor Faust would come back upstairs before going home for the night. Finding a newspaper on the desk, Aiden stretched out on the sofa to read for a while. He had just settled himself on the sofa with the paper when a shudder ran through his body. He felt a presence and looked around the room. "Hello? Is somebody here?" He waited. "No, of course not. I know he'll come," but the wind violently rattled the panes of glass in the window above the sofa. Aiden stood up, laid the newspaper down on the sofa, and stared out at the blackness of the night. He paused and smiled. He doesn't know what he's getting into with this group. Chapter 18. According to the Word of God, I am commissioned to baptize you in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins. Lydia felt the cold water rush over her face and into her ears as Pastor Faust laid her back in the water. Her body trembled from the excitement. A second later, Pastor Faust pulled her back upright and said into his microphone for everyone to hear, "God bless you, Sister Lydia. Go forth from this place a daughter of Zion, a child of Christ. All of your past sins have been washed away. We'll see you in about 2 years or so. Thanks be to the Lord." Andrew was standing on the river's edge waiting to help her out. "Come on now," she said. "Let's get you dried off. Brother Ken wants to speak with you." She grabbed Lydia's forearms and hefted her up onto the bank. "Brother Ken wants to speak with me," Lydia said. "Right now? Why?" "Here, take this towel." Andrew led her away from the crowd as far as she could without going into the rain, and then said, "He'll be here in a minute." "Am I in trouble?" "No. Well, he's just... I probably shouldn't say anything else. I'll just wait here with you until he comes." A few minutes later, Ken came walking up the hill toward them. He had 2 large towels draped around his neck. "Sister Lydia? Hi. I'll have to make this quick. Sister Andrea, you can go on back now. Thanks for waiting with her." After Andrea had left, Ken turned to Lydia. "First of all," he said, "I want to congratulate you on your baptism. This is a day you will remember the rest of your life." He took off his fogged-up glasses and wiped them on his shirt sleeve. "Glory, hallelujah, I remember the night I got baptized. It's an anniversary I celebrate every year." You made a wonderful change in your life here tonight, and I commend you for it. Thank you, Lydia said. Was that what you wanted to talk to me about? Not exactly. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Pastor Faust knows what you and Brother Brian were out doing last night. Lydia gasped. But that's not possible. And even if he did know, we didn't... Let me finish, please, Sister Lydia. This happened twice in 2 days. Obviously, the discussion you and I had yesterday morning didn't do you any good because you went out and met secretly with Brother Brian again last night. Pastor Faust sat down and had a good long talk with Brother Brian, and then he had to decide what to do about you. He took a deep breath and pulled an envelope out of his shirt pocket. Here's a plane ticket back to North Carolina. It leaves at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll have someone pick you up at the Spellman's house and drive you to the airport in Indianapolis. Do you understand? We didn't do anything wrong, Lydia said. All we did was talk and play on the playground. Where are my grandparents? Where's Richard? Have they been told about any of this? They'll be told tonight before they leave here, Ken said. Don't worry about them. I'm not worried about them. I just want to know what's going on. I paid a pile of money for a round-trip ticket to stay here for 7 days. I wanted to see Richard once for longer than 5 minutes before I leave. And if I do what you're telling me I have to do, I won't even get that. Did you know I haven't seen my brother in over 5 years? Does that matter to anybody here at all? Sister Lydia, Pastor Faust feels this is the best thing for everyone under the circumstances. Now, you'll be back here in 2 years at the most. You'll be able to see Brother Rich then, so don't... I want to see my grandparents, Lydia said. Richard, too. I want to tell them about this myself. Fine, if that's what you want. To let your family know you snuck out at night yet again to meet with one of our single brothers in secret, I'll go find him. Just wait here. Lydia took the towel Andra had given her and wrapped it around her shoulders. This is messed up, she mumbled to herself. I mean, this is just about as messed up as it gets. She looked up at the sky. Wait till Grandma and Grandpa find out. They'll tell them what's what. Richard, too. They can't make me leave. I'm an adult, for God's sake. Ken came back with Lydia's grandparents and Richard a few minutes later. Well, look at this, Lydia said. My whole family's here. I had to get kicked out of here to see all of y'all again. That's just great. Sylvia started to speak, but Ken cut her off. Now you've got them here just like you wanted. Go ahead and tell them what you've done. Lydia swallowed hard. What Ken had said to her just before he went to find her family had just sunk in. She'd have to spill her guts about where she'd been the night before in order to ask for their support. She looked desperately at Sylvia, then at Warren and Richard. They waited expectantly. You need to know one thing before I tell you why I'm being sent home, Lydia said. I didn't mean to get anybody in trouble. I had no evil intentions, I swear. Okay, last night, I left the Spellman's house and met Brian at the park in Dalton again. Pastor Faust found out, and now Brian's in a lot of trouble, and I'm being sent back home early. Oh, Liddy, Sylvia said, how could you do that? She clicked her tongue against her teeth. And what are the Spellmans going to say? They had to take you to see Brother Ken after that first time. Oh, how embarrassing. Grandma, Liddy said, I didn't mean for anybody to get in trouble or be embarrassed. Nothing happened. We just went out there to talk. Richard was speechless. All he could do was stare at her in disbelief. Warren looked at Ken. Is this Pastor Faust's decision that she be sent home? He got her the one-way ticket back home, paid for by the church. I've given it to her, and she'll be leaving early tomorrow morning. Pastor Faust and I agree that sending her home is really the only option we have. Richard looked down at the ground and nodded. I don't mind telling you this has caused a real problem, Ken continued, only looking at Sylvia and Warren. We just want her to leave before too many more people find out about it, and before it has a chance to happen again, with Brother Brian or one of our other single brothers. I'm sure it would if she thought she could get away with it. I've arranged for her to be put on our mailing list and suggest that she watch the videotaped services that will be sent to her once a week. She's got a lot to learn. She'll also be getting the Introduction to the OACC workbook in about a week. All newly baptized people receive one of those. He turned to face Lydia. Sister Lydia, please do your best to rise above whatever demon led you to do these ungodly things. It's not too late. You're baptized now. You're part of the fellowship. This is your chance to go now and avoid the temptation to sneak off with Brother Brian again. Do you understand? Yes, Lydia said, thinking, I wish everybody would stop asking me if I understand everything. Do I look like a moron? Okay then, Ken said. It's all settled. Richard, do you have anything you'd like to say to your sister before I have her taken back to the Spellman's house? Richard couldn't bring himself to look at her. I never would have believed she'd do something like this. Lydia was crushed. Warren shook his head. Come on, we're riding back to the Spellmans with her. She's going to have to pack all her stuff and everything. Gosh, when the Spellmans find out. Tell me about it, Sylvia said. Some gracious guests we've turned out to be. Ken had Jake escort them back to the church, where a car was waiting for them at the front entrance. Barbara and her husband came home a few hours later, after all the baptisms were over. Sylvia and Warren waited up for them to explain the situation, and no one was awake to see Lydia off the following morning. Chapter 19. A thick fog rolled in and settled into the grounds around the church. Brian was assigned to early morning parking lot cleanup for his 2 late-night escapades with Liddy, and he had to report to the front office by 5 o'clock in the morning to get started. Richard was on duty in the front office when Brian arrived. Good morning, brother, Brian said after he reached the office window and saw Richard sitting at the desk. Fancy meeting you here at this hour. It's still dark outside. I don't know what I was thinking when I volunteered for parking lot detail. Sheesh. Richard didn't speak. He laid some garbage bags and a reflector vest on the window. It'll be all right, Brian said. Just mainline some caffeine and wait for the jitters to shake you awake. Pastor Faust had to send Liddy home this morning. What? Brian said. What for? You know darn well what for. I heard all about it from Brother Ken last night. You and Liddy went out to the park, and you didn't volunteer to do this. It's your punishment. He turned his back on Brian. Everybody knows about it. No, that's not true. Yes, Pastor Faust and Brother Ken do know, and maybe 1 or 2 other brothers, but that's it. Richard sat back down at the desk. Pastor Faust also said you need to go down and pick up all the litter around the river, too. He wants you to do that first, and then clean up around all the porta potties while you're at it. Brother Rich, I swear I've got a lot to do, Richard said, and he went back to his work without another word. Brian started to speak and then changed his mind. He picked up his supplies and left. The rising sun filtered through the fog and cast an eerie glow across the lawn. Brian felt a little creepy walking through it. Looks like a Dracula movie, he said to himself. I just have to watch out for anybody with a cape. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a tall, slender figure in a black trench coat walking across the grass toward him. Brian stopped dead in his tracks. Oh, holy crap, he said, breathless. Excuse me? The figure continued to move without any sign of acknowledgement. Hey, hang on! The figure stopped about 30 feet away from Brian and turned to look at him. Even in the fog, Brian could see the man's dark, hollow face. His bright black eyes seemed to stare through Brian's body. Brian said, his voice wavering. I'm sorry. Carry on. Please carry on. Brian and the stranger went their separate ways. I don't like the church this early in the morning, Brian said. He walked faster and faster all the way down to the riverbank. The man continued on, taking a straight path from the front entrance of the church. No one was around. He stepped off the grass into the main parking lot. Chapter 20. Sylvia awoke with a start at the sound of the alarm. After jostling Warren, she stumbled out of bed and walked over to the window to open the drapes. Sunlight flooded the room, and Warren grunted. He covered his squinted eyes with his hands. What are you trying to do, woman? Blind me? We need to get dressed and ready to go. I've got to get your pants and shirt out of the garment bag and see if they're going to need a whole lot of ironing. You need to take a shower because you forgot it last night. It was too late last night to do it. Well, that's why you need to get a move on. I was smart and took one before the Spellmans came back last night, so I wouldn't have to worry about it today. Well, aren't you just a goody-goody? Warren! Warren sat up on the edge of the bed, stuffed his feet into his bedroom slippers, and flapped off down the hallway, his robe half on. Sylvia felt an enormous hole in the pit of her stomach as all the events of the night before welled up in her present consciousness. Oh, Lord, she mumbled as she pulled her robe on and opened the closet door. That child will be the death of us all. I still can't believe... She looked at the garment bag. Warren only had one more pair of pants and shirt left that would be suitable for the church. All he had other than that, without doing laundry at the Spellman's house or going shopping, was jeans and flannel shirts. All churches are different, she said to Warren the night before when they returned to the Spellman's house. We have to respect that. When in Rome, you do what the Romans do. Warren's last suit of clothes hung before her, wrinkled and unruly. The pants were sliding off the hanger. She snatched them out of the garment bag so violently that the bag came off the closet rod and fell to the floor. Sylvia left it where it was and slammed the closet door shut. Chapter 21. Carl parked his rental car in the middle of the church's main parking lot and got out. He watched Brian exit the building and disappear into the fog, and he saw the dark stranger moving toward him. He stood silently by his car until the man crossed the parking lot and stopped just in front of him. "You've been waiting a long time for this day." Carl grinned. "Patience is a virtue, so I hear." "I understand Aiden's explained everything to you?" "Yes, sir." "And you're aware of what's going to happen now?" "Yes, sir." "When do I move in?" The man looked back at the church. "Baton Rouge will have to be your home for a little while longer." "That's not what Aiden said. I know you have to be patient. Just think how it's going to be one day." He pointed up to the floor where Pastor Faust's office was, up there behind that big mahogany desk. "You'll have all these adoring people at your beck and call. Follow me and you can have whatever Charles has." He moved in a step closer. "I can even replace this church with an even larger one if you prefer. I can get it for you, Carl. All of it." "What's your name?" Carl asked. "Are you interested?" "I don't... Well, it's not... After all you've done for Charles, don't you think it's time you got what you deserved?" "But Aiden said I'd have a whole..." The man smiled. "There has to be a certain sequence of events, and they have to occur in a particular way. Can you handle that, Carl?" Carl looked down at the pavement. "I can't just trust somebody I don't even know. Do you know how long it took Aiden to earn that?" He looked up. "You want my faith? Then you've got to show me something that says you deserve it." "How about one of your wildest desires?" the man asked. "Do what?" "Look behind you." Carl turned around. His rental car was gone. In its place stood a new, custom-built Super Glide FXD Harley-Davidson. Carl's name was engraved on a silver plate on the front of the motorcycle, just under the headlight. "Oh my God!" Carl ran his fingers in the grooves of his name. The steel frame glinted in the rising sun. "I saw this in a magazine about a month ago. They aren't even supposed to be out in the market till next summer. How did you... Look in the storage box on the back." Carl opened the chrome box mounted on the back of the motorcycle to find a set of keys. He took them out and held them up. "What are these for?" "Charles's house. And the new church he'll build soon if you want. All for you." Carl looked at the motorcycle, then at the church, then at the stranger. He smiled slowly. "I've got a good feeling about you. I think you've got a deal." The man extended his hand and shook Carl's with gratitude. "What's your name?" Carl asked again. "My name is Denali Sioris. Welcome to the Brotherhood." Chapter 22. I had about 2 hours on the plane back home to think about what happened, and when we landed at PTI, I still believe Pastor Faust was wrong to make me leave. "And buying me a ticket out of town to boot," I muttered as I grabbed for my carry-on bag in the overhead compartment. Ooh, like I was supposed to be all grateful for it. "Thank you for saving everybody from my vicious and deceptive ways, Pastor. That was really nice of you." The flight attendant at the door smiled, and I glared back. At that point, I hadn't had time to really go back and think over everything that had happened at the conference. My opinion of the whole experience at that time was based on my being made to leave early. There was one arrangement nobody thought about. I had no ride home from the airport. Until I got there I had gone there with my grandparents, and I didn't have a key to their car. It didn't even occur to me until I got off the plane and was standing in the middle of the airport. I managed to get a hold of Frank, my next-door neighbor, and he agreed to come pick me up. As thanks, I took him out for breakfast. We got a window booth at the Waffle House. Frank slumped down in his seat, pulled a pack of Winstons out of his shirt pocket, and rooted around in his pants pocket for a lighter. "You feeling okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Why?" "You look tired." He leaned forward. "God, you really look like shit now that I take a..." "Thanks. I needed that. Especially after..." I couldn't finish that sentence because of an overwhelming urge to cry. Frank looked out the window, embarrassed by what he'd said and my reaction to it. He was only kidding, I think. "I bet that plane ride sucked. You want a cigarette?" I thought about it for a minute and rubbed my eyes. Why not? I'm already hell-bound as it is. What's a little nicotine in the temple gonna hurt? He handed me a cigarette and his lighter. "They're regular Winstons." "I don't care." "What makes you think you're hell-bound?" "It's that church my brother goes to," I said. "Some really weird stuff happened out there." "What kind of church does he go to?" "It's one of those interdenominational churches. No affiliation or anything. I took a drag off the cigarette. My brother's been going there for about 5 years, I believe. It might be 6. Anyway, the head pastor there said some stuff to me the first day we were there that really shook me up. He came in at breakfast and told all sorts of things to everybody there about me, personal stuff that hardly anybody knows. And then I got baptized. Well, that was last night. Damn, I can't believe that was just last night. So what all happened? Okay, let me back up a bit. The only reason I went at all was to get to spend a little time with my brother. I hadn't seen him even once in the past 5 years, and finally I figured out the only way I was ever going to get to see him was to just go out there to his convention thing that his church was having. I'd almost forgotten what he looks like. God. Yeah, well, it gets worse. So we get there, and I'm all excited about seeing my brother, right? We expected him to be there at the airport to pick us up. That was the plan, but then when we got off the plane, there were these other 2 guys there from the church who came out to pick us up. They said Richard was too busy to do it and their pastor had sent them instead. That was disappointing. I'll bet, Frank said. So then, wait a minute. Wait. Okay, I got it. After that, we went to stay with these people who go to the church, the Spellmans. They were really nice and seemed like they were glad to meet us and all, and we really appreciated them letting us stay at their house. But all I wanted was to see Richard. I bet I only got to spend about 10 minutes with him the whole time we were there. Why'd you decide to come back early? You might have gotten to see him if you'd stayed longer. I didn't decide it. I was forced to leave early because of something I did that the head pastor didn't approve of. Damn, what'd you do? Burn a cross? You'd think it was something like that, but it wasn't. After I realized this trip wasn't going to be what I thought it'd be, I decided I'd do anything fun that came up, but nothing came up. I should have known a solid week at a church conference would suck. I think I did know that deep down, but I was still willing to put up with it if it meant I got to see Richard. I met this guy there, and he slipped me a note asking me if I wanted to go to this park and meet him that night, like after midnight. So I went, but we ended up getting caught, and then he got in a lot of trouble, and I got fussed at. I felt bad about that, and I hate he got in trouble, but it was nice just to get out and get away from it. It felt like you're doing something naughty, you know? So he was in trouble, but then he invited me out there again the next night, and I went. We never saw anybody out there, but I guess some spy for the church was out there looking to see if we'd be dumb enough to go back out there again the next night. Somebody got major brownie points with the pastor for that, I'm sure. So who sent you home? The waitress brought our food, and we stopped talking long enough to take a few bites. I watched Frank drizzle syrup on his pancakes and thought about the things that had happened the night before. The image of the scene on the riverbank came back to mind and sent a pain through my body. I felt so guilty, though I wasn't sure why. It wasn't just going to be... It wasn't just going to the park with Brian. I believe there was more. Their head pastor was the one who decided I needed to leave, I said, and I felt like I was reliving the whole thing. They told me he was the one who made that decision, but he got his assistant pastor type guy to be the one to confront me about it. And it ended up being done right in front of my whole family. I just stepped out of the river after being baptized. I was still soaking wet, and they escorted me up on the bank where I had to wait for him to get there to tell me I had to leave. He even had the one-way ticket back here in his pocket ready to give me. Now Richard thinks I'm a total slut for what I did. I'm sure he doesn't think you're a slut. Oh, he does. You didn't see the look on his face when that pastor's assistant told him what Brian and I had done that night before. 2 nights before. Yeah, twice. But we hadn't made plans to do it again. The whole thing was completely innocent, but of course nobody believed that. Were your grandparents there? Oh yeah, they were so mad at me. We went back to the Spellman's house right then, and I had to pack up and be ready to go by 5 o'clock this morning. They didn't even bother to get up and say goodbye. They were so pissed at me. For all they know, my plane crashed, and I'm not even alive right now. Frank twirled his fork between his fingers and chuckled. I guess you won't be making that mistake again. What mistake? Going out there to see your brother. Next time what you need to do is fake some sort of fatal illness to force him to come out here to see you. The whole experience wouldn't have been so bad if I'd actually gotten to spend some time with him. That's the part that sucks the most. And people kept coming up and saying how we traveled so far to be there, but then nobody thought it was wrong or bad that we didn't get to see Richard except for a few minutes. Man, oh man. Can I just redo the whole thing? I think it's cool that you got baptized while you were out there. I wasn't expecting him to say that. Frank has never shown any interest in organized religion. I just smiled at him and nodded. Then he qualified his statement. That way you're covered in the off chance that God is real and actually gives a shit about any of us. He grinned and reached for my orange juice. I believe God's real, I said. I've always believed that. When I think about creation, the revolutions of the planetary system, the whole economy of what we call nature, which is nothing but the laws God prescribed to the matter, I see this unerring order and universal harmony running through the whole thing. No one part contradicts another. I don't know for sure what it all means. I'm just grateful to get the chance to be here and experience it. Appreciate it for what it really is. Well, we probably wouldn't be here to speculate and wonder if the universe wasn't the way it is. What if Christianity's wrong? I don't know. Maybe I'd have to... it's too early in the morning for this conversation. I need a nap and some caffeine. I just hope for my sake Christianity's the right way to go. Or if it's not, that it's enough to at least get my foot in the door. I thought about Pastor Faust. There's just so much I can't figure out about that trip and that pastor. I gotta take a piss. Hang on a minute. I watched Frank zigzag between people in booths and head to the other side of the room. He disappeared down a hallway just past the line cooks and the main serving counter. Talk about creepy, I thought. What all did that pastor say about me? My eating disorder, my middle name. He said I'd be moving to Indiana in 2 years and I'd have something about a writing ministry in the church. I tell you what, I'll leave North Carolina half past hell freezing over. But if Richard didn't tell him those things, how could he have known? Matilda's not a common middle name, and the eating disorder? Well, hardly anybody knows about that. If it's possible that he predicted that those things he predicted... I haven't even had time to think about all this since it happened. God, it feels like I was there 6 months. By the time Frank came back, I was lost in my own thoughts. I didn't even notice him sit back down. Lydia, he said, trying to get me to turn away from the window. Hey, are you okay? I jumped at the sound of his question. Sorry, I'm all right. I was just thinking about... Did I mention Richard's pastor saying some things about me? I think I did. You didn't tell me what he said, but you did mention he said some stuff about you, yeah. You know those commercials on TV where the psychic lady tells callers all these interesting things they have no way of knowing? Bunch of crap. Yeah, I know, but that was really similar to what the pastor did. We were in this huge room in the church. I mean, it was just gigantic. There must have been 2,000 people in there for breakfast. This was the first whole day we were there. He came in a little bit after we'd started eating, and he walked over to our table with a microphone and just started telling all these things about me that there's no way he could have known. Maybe he asked Richard. No, I don't think so. His pastor told everybody there's some personal stuff about me, like my middle name being Matilda, and the fact that Frank started laughing. Matilda. I forgot about that. No wonder you've been screwed up your whole life. Shut up. He told him about my middle name and the fact that I had an eating disorder a few years back. I looked away. Did you know that? I don't think I've ever mentioned that to you. Yeah, I know. How'd you know? Christ, I'm not blind. I've been living next door to you for 4 years. I looked at Frank again. This man knew about that. I don't know how, but he knew about it. You know, Frank said, I've heard how some of these so-called prophets get people to find out stuff about the people who go to their churches. Like, they'll root through your trash or follow you around just to see what dirt they can get on you. And then when you come to their church, they shout it out in front of everybody. And then they think the guy's some sort of miracle worker because he can do that. Jim Jones had people working for him that did that. But that couldn't have been the case with me. I live hundreds of miles away. The middle name, okay, maybe he could have found that out somehow without a lot of trouble. But the eating disorder, no way he could have found out about that. Maybe Richard told him a long time ago. I just forgot. Well, I don't know. Oh, I forgot one other thing. He said I believe in evolution and that we, human beings, are nothing more than the product of evolution. How could he have known that? I'm not saying this pastor necessarily dug up all this information on you, Frank said, but you need to consider all the possibilities. I know you're smart and all that, but I'm just telling you, you need to give this some more thought. You should have been there. When he shook my hand, I felt like this electrical charge passed between his hand and mine. Joy buzzer. No, and he knew I'd be embarrassed that I've been embarrassed by my middle name all my life. Matilda, who wouldn't be? And then after he finished, I flat out fainted. Shock. The cool part was Brian just happened to be right behind me when I fell, and he helped me up. I doubt that was a coincidence, Frank said, especially if this pastor dude has people fainting around him on a regular basis. Do you ever see those evangelists on cable who supposedly heal people on stage and they faint from the guy just touching them? There's always some big bouncer looking dude waiting to catch the people because they fall right on cue. Maybe I could do that for a living. I'd make a good fainter. They could dress me up in disguises so I could go on there every week and the audience wouldn't be serious. Well, that's what I'm trying to get you to do, Frank said. Don't you see how bizarre all this sounds? Think about what you're asking me to believe. That there's a real-life prophet out in Indiana who's got no better use for his talents than to work in a no-name church in a no-name town and tell everybody your middle name. Come on, Liddy. That's not all. He also did something to the rain last night while we were down at the river for the baptism so we wouldn't get wet. Oh, for the love of God. Really, he did. I'm not lying. It was pouring down rain, but none of us got wet. Y'all had to get wet anyway to get baptized, so why bother? Seems like something that outrageous would have made the news, too. But it was in the middle of the night at the church. It definitely would have made the news, though. I was there. I saw it happen. Are you saying he just made it stop raining or something? No, it kept raining, but everywhere where the people were standing, no rain fell. The ground where we were standing stayed bone dry, but there was lightning and thunder all around us. I worried at first about going in the river in case lightning struck it, but when I saw what he'd done with the rain, I just felt so safe doing whatever he told me to do. It was the most relaxing feeling I've ever had in my life. I realized at that moment why my brother trusted Pastor Faust so much. I remember how I'd felt the same way out there on that riverbank. Frank finished it off, his third cup of coffee, set the cup down and looked at me. That really is something, Liddy. Are you sure it wasn't? It wasn't anything short of a miracle, I said. And there are lots of things like that this man has done over the years, from what Richard's told me. He even allowed himself to get sucked up inside of a tornado and live to tell about it, all because he said God promised to take care of his prophets. I thought it was a bunch of crap for years, but then after seeing it for myself, I can see why my brother goes there. There's something powerful in that church, and it's the pastor. What's his name? Oh, let's see. It's like I have a mental block against his name. Probably because I'm so tired. Lloyd? No, that's not right. Where'd that name come from? Faust? Yeah, Faust. C.T. Faust. Pastor Charles T. Faust. I've never heard of him. His church has congregations all over the world, I told him. They've got one in Norfolk. I think that's the closest one to us right now. Pastor Faust also said I'd be moving to Indiana sometime in the next 2 years, and I'll have a writing ministry in the church. The more I thought about it, the more I believed it just might happen. Frank, seeing I'd finished eating, handed me a cigarette. He lit one for himself and then pushed the lighter across the table to me. I don't know, he said. But then again, if you're convinced, and if this is the way it ends up working out for you, I wish you the best. Just please do me a favor and don't jump into anything too soon. Think things through first. Would you do that? I'm not planning on making any decisions or doing anything in the near future, I said. Thanks for the smokes, by the way. Thanks for breakfast. Thanks for picking me up. Ready to go, he asked. Yeah. Frank said he was going back to bed as soon as he got home, and that left me with the whole day to myself. I wasn't planning on spending it with him, but I could have used somebody to talk to longer than just that little bit at the Waffle House. Thoughts of my few days at the Open Arms flitted in and out of my mind while I watched various talk shows, sitcom reruns, and commercials by the dozens. I stood by the microwave waiting for my lunch to heat up, and I remembered looking up at the sky the night before. Pastor Faust kept us safe. I felt a sense of pride for having met this man, having been baptized by him, having been the subject of his prophecy. I don't remember much about the following days of my vacation, except that I watched a lot of television and slept late every day. I thumbed through my Bible and reread all of my Open Arms study notes, taking extra time on the parts that dealt with baptism. The scriptures pointed out in my notes really did back up the church's belief that baptism in Jesus' name was essential for salvation. I couldn't believe I'd never been taught that before. It's so glaringly obvious, I said to myself as I read. Why don't all churches teach this? Look at these scriptures, for heaven's sake. On the morning my grandparents were scheduled to fly back, I was sitting outside in my backyard, staring at the trees and too tall grass. I hadn't had a cigarette in 2 days and was fidgeting with everything in reach to keep from running to the convenience store down the street for a pack. I'd mashed my last pack down the garbage disposal and destroyed it. Otherwise, I knew I'd end up giving in. I chewed on a sassafras stem as hard as I could until my back teeth actually ached. The phone rang, and I jumped up out of my lawn chair to go answer it. It was Grandma. First time I'd heard from her since I was sent home. We made it back, she said, still with a little anger in her voice. Anger or fatigue. I couldn't be sure which it was and knew better than to ask just in case it was anger. I thought you'd like to know. Oh, okay, I said. That's good. Yeah. I want to apologize for the way I acted out there, Grandma. It really wasn't very mature. But I've been doing a lot of thinking since then, and I've started to realize that maybe, Pastor, before you say another word, I want you to know that Warren and I talked a long time last night on the plane this morning about Richard's church. We both think there's something not quite right about it. Now, we don't have anything to base that on, but it's something we feel in our hearts. I know you've been pretty critical of the church all along, but we've started thinking maybe you were right. But Grandma, that's what I wanted to tell you. I might have been wrong about all that. I've been thinking about it ever since I got back here, and I've about decided that what Pastor Faust said was, well, I think he's a good pastor, and we'll find out eventually if his predictions for me come true or not. I'm looking forward to see if they do. Oh, Liddy. Well, look at it this way. Do you think Richard will be in a church that was ungodly? Not on purpose, but sometimes we can't see. I know I was a little rough on the church at first, I said, but you got to believe me. I've given this a lot of thought, and I've gone back over all the literature and the Bible study notes they gave me, and the more I read, the more their doctrine makes sense to me. Lord, Liddy, their doctrine is one of our biggest complaints. All that about becoming unsaved and having to be baptized in a certain way, I don't know what to think about all that. Aren't you glad to hear I actually want to study the Bible for once in my life? That I'm excited about it? This isn't quite the way I thought it would happen. She sighed, and there was dead air for a minute. I could hear her breathing. I think we need to sit down and talk about it. You can't make your decisions based on emotions. I'll support you in whatever you decide, but can we just sit down and talk about it first? But you're basing your opinion of the church on emotions, I answered. I know I'm not making any decisions right now. But yeah, we can get together and do that. You want to do it tonight? That'd be fine. Just come over around 7. I went back outside after we got off the phone. Here it comes, I mumbled to myself. Every time I find something I like, they pick it apart and criticize it to death. Like when I decided to go to college in Camden the first 4 years instead of Center City, you'd think I told them I was going off with a band of gypsies the way they reacted. I swear I don't get them. Like it's their life we're talking about here. No sooner had I positioned myself in the lawn chair that the phone rang again. I got to get a cordless, I said as I ran back inside. Hello? Sister Lydia? I took a step back and grabbed the kitchen table for support. Yes, this is she. I already knew who it was. Sister, this is Pastor Faust. I just wanted you to know that my support and prayers will be with you this evening when you go have that talk with your grandparents. My grandmother just called me. I know it's going to be difficult because you don't have much of a foundation right now, but your faith in the Lord and what He's got in store for you will help see you through this. Who knows? Maybe we'll help Warren and Sylvia see the light too. Oh, thank you, Pastor Faust. I really needed to hear that. Well, I just wanted you to know that I'm here for you, and I'll be rooting for you tonight. It's not easy living a life for God, and if there's anything I can do to help, you just let me know, okay? Yes, sir, I surely will. Thank you for calling, Pastor. You're welcome, and I'll see to it that those videos in your introductory workbook get sent out in today's mail. That way in the future you'll have more ammo in your gun, so to speak. Thank you, sir. Anytime. Talk with you later, sister. Yes, sir. Bye-bye. That was the clincher for me. That one phone call helped take care of any doubt I had left in my mind that Pastor Faust was the one God wanted to lead me. This was a divine plan. I'd gone from believing in chaos and coincidence to believing in order, God's order, and I wanted to run out and tell the world what had just happened. At first I thought I might go tell Frank, but I knew he was probably asleep. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. Like my grandparents, he would have just poo-pooed it as some sort of trick. He's got your phone line tapped, he'd say. Then I'd tell him he was reaching a bit there. Why would Pastor Faust want to go to all the trouble of doing something like that? The meeting went about the way I expected it would, with Grandma going over how the rest of the conference went. They didn't get to see Richard again the rest of the week, and their newly formed impression of the church's structure and leadership. I told them that I'd had a new insight into the church, too. Richard, like all the brothers of the church, was very busy during conference week. They didn't always have time to be with their families because of all the other things that needed to get done. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that goes on there and has to be taken care of that the average person doesn't see, I said. How many people did they say were there? Something like 15,000? It takes a lot of work to put together a thing that size. And I know now that that's what kept Richard away. Pastor Faust wouldn't have let that happen if it wasn't necessary. Grandpa had to put his 2 cents worth in. Liddy, how in the world did you go from being so against the church to being a big supporter of it in less than a week? How's that possible? I've never heard you say a good word about that church till now. Explain to me how that came about. All I could do was smile. God's awesome, isn't he? Yes, he is, but that doesn't answer the question. I found the church God called me to, Grandpa. It's as simple as that. Is it really? I want to know what changed. What exactly? Y'all saw the same stuff I saw. So how can you even wonder if Pastor Faust has a calling? Has your pastor ever been able to do what he did? Can he prophesy? Can he keep the rain off? No, he can't. The open arms is where God wants me, and I'd be willing to bet Pastor Faust's prophecy comes true just like he said it would. And I know I've got him on my side because he called me just this morning and told me so. Their mouths dropped open. He called you? Grandma asked. Personally? What'd he say? He said he knew you just called me and that I was going to come over here tonight to talk about the church. And he just wanted to let me know that I had his full support and that I'd come through just fine. I sat back and folded my arms, waiting for their answer. Grandpa was overwhelmed. He looked helplessly at Grandma. How could he have known that? He whispered to her as if I couldn't hear. There's no answer except that he's a man of God, I answered before Grandma had a chance to speak. Over 800 miles away. What other explanation could there be? Grandma got up from her seat, saying she needed to reheat the gravy, but then she left it on the table. I heard her let out a long groan as she moved toward the kitchen. Let's get one thing straight, I said, knowing she could still hear me. I'm not going to make any major decisions without giving them a lot of thought first, okay? All I wanted you to know was maybe I misjudged the open arms. Maybe I was just jealous because Richard seemed to prefer their company to ours, the way he never seemed to want to come visit. But I think there's more to it than that now. You were there. Didn't you feel that? Grandma had reemerged from the kitchen and was left standing in the dining room doorway. Her right hand was clamped firmly over her left wrist like she wanted to tear her arm off. I agree with you, Liddy, she said. I do believe there's more to that church than we thought. Grandpa nodded but said nothing. Maybe we better leave it alone for now, I said. Just know I'm not going to do anything anytime soon. Does that make you feel better? Grandma sat back down and picked up a napkin to wipe her hands on, not saying a word. Silence hung in the air for several minutes until she spoke. So are you ready to go back to work on Thursday? I guess so. I've had several days to rest and do whatever I want. Does anybody at work know you came back early? No, I snapped. I cringed at the sound of my own voice. Well, I didn't know if you had. Grandma said after a thought. And don't holler at me like that. I haven't told anybody at work I got back early. They would have just guilted me into going back to work earlier this week, and I wasn't up to that. I'm sorry. I'm just frustrated I don't know why I'm frustrated right now. I just am. The 11 o'clock news was on when I got home. All I could think about as I sat there looking at the footage of a 4-car pileup that had happened on I-40 that afternoon was that I felt great. I turned off the TV and went to bed, taking my study notes and Bible with me. Chapter 23. An excited crowd of parishioners were waiting to meet Carl at the Baton Rouge airport as he stepped off the plane. He had stayed in Dalton Fisher a few days after the conference was over to work out some business with Pastor Faust, so all the members of his congregation who had been able to go to Indiana for the week were already back. Most of them had taken the day off work to welcome him home. Right this way, Pastor, one of the single brothers said, attempting to guide Carl to the limousine that was waiting for him. Carl just stared at him blankly. Another man took Carl's bags and smiled. It is so good to have you home, Pastor Steele. I hope you had a pleasant flight. It had been Pastor Faust's rule for the 25 years the church had been in operation that the head of no other open arms church could hold the title of pastor. Carl was stunned. Excuse me, brother, what did you call me? He asked the man who took his bags. The man placed the bags gently in the trunk and shut the lid. I called you Pastor Steele, sir. What else would I call you? Everybody's always called me Brother Carl. The man shook his head and chuckled. Oh, Pastor Steele, you are so funny. Now let's get you on home, okay? Carl took a moment to greet his congregation before getting in the car. Everyone called him Pastor. The car glided easily down the interstate, and Carl looked out the window. The leaders of all the other congregations were going to be so jealous. He wished he could see the look on their faces when they heard. They won't be surprised, said a voice from the other side of the back seat. Carl turned back suddenly to see Denali sitting beside him. You deserve the title of pastor. His black leather coat gleamed in the sunlight coming in through the moonroof. Does Charles know? Of course. I can't believe I'm a pastor. People who knew me before I came to the church wouldn't be able to believe it either. I can't wait to see everything else. Denali laughed. It's coming. Some now, some later. Your congregation here will still be small, but don't worry. The driver, another single brother in the church, looked at Carl through the rearview mirror. Pastor Steele? Yes, brother. I just wanted you to know I am so glad God brought me into this ministry, and I'm glad to have you as my pastor. It's made my life so much more fulfilling, knowing I'm using my talents to serve the Lord. He paused and smiled. I'm so grateful to know you're the one responsible for my soul. The ministry is lucky to have you, brother. And sir, if you don't mind us stopping by the church on your way home, the brothers have a little surprise for you. Oh, really? What kind of surprise? My Harley's already been delivered? The man grinned. Well, yes, sir, it's waiting for you at home, but you'll have to wait and see what the real surprise is, sir. Carl turned to face Denali and whispered, Can he see you? He can neither see nor hear me. You can talk to me just like you used to talk to Aiden, and no one will be the wiser. They took the turn off the interstate heading toward the church, and Carl was again looking out his window. They sure have cleaned up this stretch of road since I left, he said. Did the city do this? The driver glanced back. Sir? The road, Carl said. Who did all this cleaning up? This road always was a disgrace. Looks like they planted some trees and done some landscaping or something, too. He has no idea what you're talking about, Denali told him. The car turned off onto a private paved drive, and Carl frowned. This isn't the way we go. You have to turn back and go about another half-mile down. Quiet, said Denali. I'll be taking you home in a minute, the driver said. But first the brothers and I have a little something at the church we'd like to show you. He could hardly contain himself. The new sliding glass doors the single brothers had bought and installed on the front of the church weren't what Carl was gasping about. It was the expansive glass and marble chapel that stood before him when he stepped out of the car. It was bigger and even more impressive than the Dalton Fisher Church, with nearly twice as much ground space and a pavilion that would have swallowed Pastor Faust's activity center whole. Denali stood beside Carl and looked around at his creation, smiling at the accomplishment. How could Brother Carl oversee all this? He asked the man who stood speechless at his side. Only Pastor Steele could handle it. Carl looked ready to faint. Pastor Steele, the driver said, gently taking Carl's arm. Come see the new doors. I knew you'd be surprised. Wait until you see your house, Denali whispered. 20 of Carl's single brothers were standing at the front of the church, applauding at the return of their leader. A big red ribbon was tied across the front of the doors, and one of the brothers held a gigantic pair of scissors for Carl. A presentation speech was made, but Carl didn't hear a word of it. He just gaped at his church in awe. He had to bend his head straight back to see to the top. You better say something, Denali advised him. They worked awfully hard to get these installed before your return. What am I supposed to say? Carl whispered. Well, they installed these sliding glass doors while you were gone because you'd mentioned how nice it would look to have them. That's your surprise. Don't they look nice? Uh-huh. Well, then get up there and show your appreciation. Carl ascended the steps amid thunderous applause and took the scissors. This is truly the greatest day of my life, aside from the day I was baptized in Jesus' holy name. Amen. Amen, the men shouted. And looking here at these beautiful doors, knowing all the expense and hard work that you men put into them, I'm reminded of just how lucky I am to be a part of this wonderful ministry. This is the place God has called all of us to be, brothers. We can certainly see that by just looking around this beautiful campus. Only the Lord God Almighty could bring about such a fantastic place. And I am so grateful to be working alongside committed men like you in my service to the Lord. To quote our founding pastor, Pastor C.T. Faust, ain't God good? The men cheered and shouted as Carl reached out and cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed. Pieces of red velvet fluttered down to the white marble steps, and Carl wept with joy. Chapter 24. Dean Roberts, Uncle Dean to Liddy, parted 2 slats of the Venetian blinds covering his living room window to look at what had just pulled up in his yard. He smiled at the sight of the mud-flecked blue Volkswagen bus. Lydia had made it halfway up the porch steps when Dean opened the front door and gazed at her through the wire of the screen door. "Don't you know how to visit any more now that you're grown?" he asked, unlatching the screen door and pushing it open. "It pays to check up on us old folks from time to time, you know." "Grandma and Grandpa do that," Liddy said, grinning. She gave Dean a good tight hug and went inside. "Besides, 55 is hardly what I'd call old." Dean had lived beside Sylvia and Warren for nearly 25 years in his little white one-story house. And after Liddy's parents died, Dean took on the responsibility of doing for her what Sylvia and Warren no longer could. He spoiled her rotten. Richard too, but Richard wasn't quite as open to the attention as Liddy was. Dean kept track of their birthdays, each good grade or other school achievement, and every important anniversary for the children, surprising them with a new book or some other gift as was appropriate that was as appropriate for their age as he could guess. He also made sure to have a big bowl of chocolate kisses and marshmallows ready for them when they came over. Richard would thank him with a sheepish grin. Liddy responded with a flung-wide hug and wet kisses on the jaw. "Isn't it something how your definition of what's old changes as times go... Let me start over with that sentence. "Isn't it something how your definition of what's old changes as time goes by?" Dean asked as he followed Liddy, who was tiptoeing across the slick, faded linoleum floor, heading toward the back bedroom. Liddy looked back over her shoulder and grinned. "I think you'd best not go in there right now," Dean whispered. He gently took her by the arm and guided her back up the hallway. "Verna's really not up to visitors today." Liddy nodded gravely. Dean had married Teresa, his high school sweetheart. Teresa was diagnosed with bone cancer in 1980, just a few weeks after her mother moved in with them, and she was dead 3 months after the diagnosis. Dean was left to care for his mother-in-law, Verna, from then on. She had reached the point of needing full-time care in a nursing home, but Dean kept saying, "1 more week, I can handle it." He knew the hell it would be for Verna, having to let strangers feed her, bathe her, and give her her medication, believing the whole time that they meant to poison her. She'd live out her final days in sheer terror if Dean put her in an institution. "I just finished making some tea," he said as Liddy settled herself down on the sofa. Liddy had grabbed her usual handful of chocolate kisses and marshmallows out of the bowl on the coffee table. She unwrapped a piece of chocolate and popped it in her mouth, preferring to let it melt instead of just chewing it up right away. "Would you like some?" "Just a small glass." Liddy watched Dean walk across the kitchen floor to the cabinet above the counter to the left of the sink. He went out of her range of view for a moment, near the corner of the kitchen where nobody in the living room would have been able to see him because of the narrow doorway connecting the 2 rooms, and she turned her attention to 2 stacks of unopened bills on the coffee table. One stack contained Dean's bills, the power bill, the phone bill, and gas bill were on top, and the other stack was made up of mostly Verna's bills. It seemed like those same 2 stacks were there every time she came to visit, and they never moved or changed their size or shape. They never got any higher or lower, and they were always stacked neatly. Liddy put her candy down and picked up a paper clip off the edge of the table. She began to straighten it, bending it hard between her thumbs. "Have you been to see your Grandma and Grandpa yet?" Dean asked, bringing in 2 glasses of iced tea and a plate of chocolate chip cookies on a tray. He gently moved the 2 stacks of bills aside to set the tray down and then lowered himself slowly into his recliner. Liddy put the paper clip down on the sofa beside her and lifted her glass. "I was going to go over there after I left here," she said. "We haven't really talked much since we got back from seeing Richard." "Really? We don't..." Liddy started to say that she and her grandparents hadn't been able to see eye to eye on the open arms, but then thought better of it. "I've just been busy." "Oh," Dean let out a sigh. "So it doesn't have anything to do with what happened out there then?" "Well, Mom told me you got sent home early. I was awfully sorry to hear that, especially since you haven't seen Richard in, 5 years?" "Yeah, about 5 years. I didn't get to see a whole lot of him the few days I was there either. They kept him so busy I barely even knew he was there." She quickly added, "It didn't bother me that he was so busy, though. Richard's on the staff at the church, and during conference week the staff members really have a lot to do." "He's on the staff? I didn't know that." "Oh, yeah, he's part of a whole big group of single men who have devoted their lives to the ministry. It's a great thing, and I was glad to see he'd been taking care of himself, you know. I was so worried about him when he went off and joined the Navy. You can get around some awfully rough men there." This is Dean talking. "I had a hard time just keeping my religion when I was in. Maybe I'll get out there sometime next spring or summer and pay him a visit. He keeps writing me and inviting me out. I would have gone to the conference with y'all, but with Verna and everything, I just couldn't do it. Don't you have a nurse or somebody who comes in and watches her during the day while you're at work? I do, but I can't afford to pay her to be here around the clock for an entire week. He looked at the bills, the stacks askew from being pushed out of the way. Maybe I'll have enough money saved up by this fall to pay her to do it for a whole week. I'm going to do whatever I can to keep her here where she's comfortable till her time comes. I promised Teresa before she died that I'd do that. I admire that, but you should definitely get out there if you can. You're entitled to some vacation time just like everybody else. Don't stretch yourself too thin. Teresa wouldn't want you doing that, I'm sure. I don't have any money to offer you or I'd help you out. Maybe we can get together and plan to go at the same time. That'd be neat. Sort of like a little family reunion. Did you get a chance to meet Pastor Faust? Not only did I get to meet him, Uncle Dean, but he baptized me the night before I left. I wish you could have been there. Oh, Lydia, that's fantastic. Dean was almost up out of his chair. Does this mean you'll start going to church with us again? Lord, that would make me and your grandparents so happy if you did. We'll have to wait and see on that. Okay, he said, picking up a cookie and breaking it in half. He chewed a bite of it before adding, but don't give up now. The Lord wants you to do what's right. I don't intend to give up. There are just some things that can't be rushed into. Pastor Faust said I need to pray on it and then see what God wants for me. A smile spread over his face as he gazed at her. Is it too much to say your experience at Richard's church has helped you see the light on that whole evolution thing you believe in? I still don't know about all that. I mean, this all just happened. We'll see. Okay, but you'll let me know as soon as you figure it out, won't you? Lydia put down her glass, picked up her paperclip, and continued bending it as straight as she was able. Yes, sir. Okay, I think I'll read this last one, then we're going to stop here for this segment. Chapter 25. I went straight home after leaving Uncle Dean's house, even though I was going to visit Grandma and Grandpa. I felt like I needed some support from somewhere, and I prayed that I'd have something from the open arms waiting in the mail for me when I got home. A large package was stuck halfway in between my screen door and front door, and I pulled it out before checking to see what was in the mailbox. Thank God, I whispered, the intro book. I took the package inside and went back to get the rest of my mail. Mixed in with the bills and junk was a thick letter from the Dalton Fisher OACC, and my name and address were computer-generated in bold font across the front of it. I laid it aside and opened the box. Inside, underneath some videotapes and bulletins from past church services, was my introduction to the principles and doctrines of the OACC workbook. I was so excited to finally have it, and I really wanted to tell somebody how good it felt to have this book in my hands. But who would want to hear it? Frank next door wouldn't care. Grandma and Grandpa didn't support the church, and don't even ask about my friends. I just tried to think. What would Pastor Faust do? If he were in my situation, how would he handle it? We'll get you through this thing yet, sister, Pastor Faust would say, both of us remembering my nights with Brian and both of us knowing how truly sorry I was for it. I sniffed the 3-ring binder. It smelled like a new shower curtain. In blue and gold lettering across the front of the binder were the words Open Arms Christian Church, and a picture of Pastor Faust was centered just a couple inches below. I gently opened the binder and read through the welcome introduction pages. The first section really made me feel good. The need to be loved and to belong is basic to every human being. God allows us to meet those needs through being part of a family, and that's why family matters. At the Open Arms Christian Church in Dalton Fisher, Indiana, we're one big happy family. We're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, we're newlyweds, married with children, widows and widowers, single parents, and just plain single. We're young, old, and in between. We care for each other, love each other, pray for and minister to each other, and we labor together sharing God's holy word with our neighbors and friends so that they may come to know the truth and become a part of the family too. We wish to congratulate you and thank you for taking the bold step out into faith to hear the truth and be baptized in Jesus' holy name. When you think of a place where you will be loved and belong, think of the Open Arms Christian Church, because at the Open Arms, family really matters. And then just below that is the signature, Pastor C.T. Faust, Bishop and Founding Pastor. I closed the cover and looked at Pastor Faust's picture again. I felt so comforted and peaceful, and for the first time in years, I felt like I really belonged to something. I was in a church that changed people's lives.
It wasn't just a front, they made a difference. Then the thought of Brian came back to me. I tried not to have bad feelings toward him, but there were times I just couldn't help it. He had tarnished Pastor Faust's impression of me as well as Richard's. My grandparents, too, more than likely. I couldn't remember Brother Ken's name as I sat there on the coffee table, leafing through the book and taking note of the headings for each of the studies, but I could recall how angry he was when he found us at the park that night. I was getting to the point that I could see everything in my life through the eyes of the open arms, and more particularly through the eyes of Pastor Faust. It never occurred to me to stop and consider how quickly it was happening. I watched all the videos, worked on my welcome book, read the literature, and listened to the instructional tapes every day whenever I had a few spare minutes. Pastor Faust discouraged church members from listening to music, even Christian music, unless it had either been produced by the AACC or appeared on Pastor Faust's Truth List. The Truth List was updated bi-monthly, and copies of it were sent out to everyone in the church's regular mailing list. There really weren't many songs on the list that interested me, so while I was out driving around doing home visits for my job, I listened to the audio cassettes the church sent me. The cassettes mostly contained Pastor Faust's sermons, but some were just Pastor Faust talking about whatever he said God had laid on his heart. Sometimes I'd listen to them 3 or 4 times if I had no new tapes. I'd learned to hate silence. I was really grateful to have a pastor who cared enough to spend time figuring out what music was appropriate for his congregation. Most pastors just preach on Sunday morning, and that's all the contact they have with the people in their church the rest of the week. Not Pastor Faust. He was a man truly devoted to his calling. And we're going to stop there for this segment. The next segment that I read will start with a newsletter for the Baton Rouge Church from Reverend Carl Steele. So we're going to read this in the next section, and we will go from there. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I hope you come back for more. Take care.